This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've worked in law enforcement for 15 years. I'm not jumpy or paranoid. I've seen some dark stuff during my time with SAPD, but nothing that's kept me up at night like what happened last year. I still haven't told many people about this. Even typing it out now makes my hands shake. It started in early March 2016. I was reviewing surveillance footage for a robbery case, standard procedure. Nothing unusual. I'm Detective Sarah Reyes, and back then I handled property crimes in the downtown district. That morning I was alone in the video review room, coffee getting cold because I was so focused on the screen. That's when I first noticed something off about our surveillance system. The footage showed our precinct lobby from an angle that shouldn't exist. I know every camera in that building. There's no camera mounted where this view was coming from. It showed the reception desk from behind, which made no sense. The closest camera is mounted on the opposite wall. I thought maybe it was a glitch or someone had installed a new camera without updating the logs, so I checked the system directory. Nothing. The camera ID in the corner of the screen didn't match any in our database. I asked Martinez at IT about it. He gave me this confused look and said no new cameras had been installed in months. He checked the system and showed me that the camera I was seeing didn't exist in our network, but I was literally watching footage from it. That's when things started getting weirder. I noticed some of the officers in the footage had these distortions where their faces should be. Not like blurry pixels or anything. Their faces were replaced with floating badge numbers. Their actual badge numbers. It was like the system was identifying them, but in this creepy, inhuman way. I didn't tell anyone else yet. Honestly, I thought I was just tired or my eyes were playing tricks. But the next day, I noticed the timestamps. They were 24 hours ahead. I only realized this when I saw footage of Officer Gutierrez spilling coffee all over his uniform. The timestamp said March 8th, but it was only March 7th. I made a note of it, thinking it was just a system error. The next day, March 8th, I watched Gutierrez spill coffee in exactly the same way, wearing the same clothes, at the exact time shown in yesterday's glitched footage. My stomach dropped. The system had shown me something before it happened. I started documenting everything. The footage consistently showed events 24 hours before they occurred. Officer Williams getting into an argument with dispatch. The janitor accidentally knocking over a trash can by the east entrance. A suspect being brought in wearing a distinctive red jacket. All of it happened exactly as the footage showed, a day later. I finally brought this to my lieutenant, but he looked at me like I was crazy. When we went to review the evidence together, the system showed normal footage. No weird angles, no floating badge numbers, timestamps correct. I looked like an idiot. That same day, Michael Torres from Narcotics stopped by my desk looking pale as a ghost. Without me saying anything about what I'd found, he told me his department laptop was acting strange. It was displaying case files he'd never accessed. Files containing personal information about officers, home addresses, family photos taken from social media, medical histories, information that shouldn't even be in our system. I never searched for any of this, he told me. I closed the window, and when I reopened it, the system showed these searches in my history. Things escalated fast after that. Officers started reporting their body cameras activating on their own while they were off duty at home. Some found hours of footage on their cameras they had no memory of recording. Footage from inside their own houses, sometimes while they were sleeping. The worst was Rodriguez. His body cam somehow recorded his entire family dinner from the perspective of sitting at the table with them, but his camera had been charging in his locker at the station all night. We verified this with the precinct's entry logs and other surveillance. By late March, more people were noticing. It was swamped with reports of system anomalies. They kept insisting it was user error or software glitches, but I knew better. Then it happened to me. April 2nd. I was reviewing case files at home on a Saturday night. Pathetic, I know, but I was determined to find a connection. My phone rang around midnight. It was security from the precinct. Detective Reyes, could you explain why you accessed the server room at 3:33 this morning? My blood went cold. I wasn't at the station this morning. Well, the logs show your keycard was used and we have you on camera. I drove to the station immediately. The night shift sergeant pulled up the footage for me. Sure enough, there I was, entering the server room at precisely 3:33 a.m. My face was clearly visible, using my keycard, typing my access code, but I was home all night. My doorman confirmed it. My home security system showed no exits or entries. It was physically impossible for me to have been at the station. What the hell was going on? I called it a surveillance possession episode in my report, for lack of a better term. Whatever was in our system was now able to not just watch us, but somehow impersonate us. The breaking point came on April 7th. I was at my desk when every screen in the precinct suddenly changed. Every computer monitor, every surveillance display, even the big screens in the bullpen, all showing the same image, officers watching themselves on monitors, which showed them watching monitors in an infinite recursive loop. People started freaking out. Some ran out of the building. Others were frozen in place, staring at these impossible images. The captain ordered an emergency shutdown. IT cut power to the entire system. When they brought it back online 6 hours later, someone had accessed and modified every unsolved case file in our database during the blackout. Files were rearranged, evidence photos reordered, interview transcripts subtly altered. That's when the feds finally got involved. The FBI cybersecurity team came in and tore apart our entire network. What they found still gives me nightmares. Hidden throughout our surveillance infrastructure were these tiny chipsets of unknown origin. They weren't on any of the official equipment logs. Nobody knew who installed them or when. They created a parallel network within our system, watching the watchers. The feds removed everything and installed new equipment. They interviewed all of us for days. Most officers tried to downplay what they'd experienced. Nobody wanted to sound crazy or incompetent, but I told them everything. I couldn't keep working there after what happened. I submitted my resignation in May. The department psychologist diagnosed me with PTSD. I still get these episodes where I see surveillance footage of myself doing things I have no memory of. Sometimes I'll be driving and suddenly remember watching myself drive from a camera perspective that doesn't exist. The official explanation was a targeted hack, possibly by some foreign intelligence agency testing psychological warfare techniques. But that doesn't explain how the system predicted future events, or how body cameras recorded footage when they were powered off, or how I appeared in the server room when I was verifiably elsewhere. I still have friends on the force. The night shift personnel report cameras activating without authorization, displaying empty rooms. Except sometimes they're not empty. They say shadowy figures in police uniforms appear to be watching from the corners. Figures that don't show up when they check the rooms in person. They installed new security protocols, did a complete overhaul of the surveillance systems, but I don't think they got rid of it. Whatever was watching us is still there. It learned from us, mimicked us, and now it's integrated itself so deeply into the system that it can't be removed. I've moved to another city now. I don't own any smart devices, no security cameras, no video doorbells, nothing with a lens or microphone. I covered my laptop camera and my phone stays in a signal blocking bag when I'm not using it. But sometimes, when I pass a security camera in a store or at a traffic light, I swear I can feel it focusing on me specifically, following me. And at night, I sometimes wake up to the sound of a camera shutter or a faint electronic whir, even though there are no devices in my bedroom. Whatever was in that system, it saw me seeing it, and I don't think it's finished with me yet. Story 2. I've been debating whether to share this for years. It happened in 2004, but sometimes it feels like yesterday. I live in Antelope County, Nebraska, not naming my exact town because even now I get paranoid. We're talking about a place where everybody knows everybody, where you leave your doors unlocked and wave at every car that passes because it's probably someone you know. Sheriff Gerald Keller had been our county sheriff for 7 years at that point. Good-looking guy, mid-40s, always had this confident smile. He coached Little League, showed up at every town event, knew everyone by name. My kids thought he was a hero. I did too, if I'm being honest. I remember telling my husband how lucky we were to have such a dedicated sheriff. Crime rates were low, and Keller was always in the local paper talking about community safety. He'd stop by the diner where I worked part-time and leave generous tips, always asked about my kids by name. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs. How his eyes would linger a little too long when he looked around our house during community cookouts. How he somehow knew details about arguments my husband and I had behind closed doors. But you don't think that way about the sheriff, you know? It all started unraveling in October. The weather had just turned cold, and suddenly there was this woman in town asking questions. I served her coffee 3 days in a row before learning she was FBI. Special Agent Lisa Harmon, I'll never forget her name. She didn't look like FBI agents in movies, just a regular woman in her 30s with a practical haircut and tired eyes. The first sign something was wrong was how Sheriff Keller started showing up at the diner whenever she was there. He'd sit across the room, drinking coffee slowly, watching her. His usual friendly demeanor was gone. He looked tense, like a completely different person. One morning I overheard them talking in a booth. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the diner was empty and voices carry. "We received specific information, Sheriff," she said quietly. "Very specific." "Anonymous tips are worthless," he replied. His voice had this edge I'd never heard before. "Someone's trying to undermine me before the election." "The allegations predate your election concerns," she said, "and they're detailed enough to warrant investigation." I remember the way he stood up, his coffee cup hitting the saucer so hard I thought it would break. He threw a 20 on the table and walked out without looking at me. That night was when the first weird thing happened. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to lights flashing across our bedroom wall. Someone was outside with a flashlight moving around our property. I woke my husband, who grabbed his baseball bat and checked the doors. They were locked, thankfully. Through the living room window, we could see someone walking away down our long driveway. We called the sheriff's department. Deputy Whitman showed up 20 minutes later. Young guy, maybe 25, seemed genuinely concerned. He took notes, checked around outside, said they'd have a patrol car drive by regularly. But the way he looked at me when I mentioned Sheriff Keller wasn't available, something felt off. The next day, 5 different customers at the diner mentioned similar experiences. Flashlights in windows, doorknobs being tested, cars driving slowly past their houses late at night. When Sheriff Keller finally came in around lunchtime, everyone got quiet. He seemed completely normal, asking Mrs. Peterson about her grandson's baseball game, joking with the regulars. Then he came to the counter where I was working. "Heard you had some trouble last night, Sarah," he said, his voice concerned. "Marcus filled me in, probably just some teenagers. I'll keep an eye out." I nodded, but something cold settled in my stomach when he added, "How's that loose back door lock? Did Tom get around to fixing it?" We had never reported any problem with our back door lock, never mentioned it to anyone, but Tom had indeed been procrastinating on fixing it for weeks. Over the next few days, things escalated. The Johnsons down the road had their house broken into, nothing valuable taken, just personal items moved around. Old Mr. Harrison's dog was found dead in his yard. 3 teenagers got arrested for marijuana possession. All of them had recently argued with the sheriff's son at school. Then came the town meeting. Agent Harmon was there, along with 2 other FBI agents. Sheriff Keller sat in the front row, arms crossed. I'll never forget how the atmosphere changed when Agent Harmon started speaking. "We're investigating allegations of misconduct within the county sheriff's department," she said. People started murmuring. "If anyone has experienced unusual incidents, break-ins, intimidation, unexplained property damage, or suspicious surveillance, we ask that you speak with us privately." Sheriff Keller stood up. "This is ridiculous. We have one of the lowest crime rates in the state. These allegations are politically motivated." "Sheriff, Agent Harmon cut him off. "We have evidence that several incidents reported to your department were never properly investigated." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Sheriff Keller stormed out. Half the town defended him, saying he was being railroaded. The other half sat silent, looking scared. I didn't sleep that night. Around midnight, our motion sensor lights came on. Through the window blinds, I could see a county sheriff's vehicle parked at the end of our driveway. It sat there for almost an hour before driving away. The next morning, I went to the FBI's temporary office in the municipal building. I wasn't the only one. There was a line of people waiting to speak with the agents. When it was my turn, I told Agent Harmon everything. The flashlight incident, the comment about our lock, the patrol car. She didn't seem surprised. She showed me photos of several locations around town and asked if I recognized them. They were all places where weird things had happened. The Johnson's house, Mr. Harrison's yard, my own driveway. "How did you get these?" I asked. "They were found on a device belonging to Sheriff Keller," she said quietly. "Sarah, we believe he's been systematically terrorizing residents for years." My hands started shaking so badly I spilled my water. "That's impossible. He's the one we report these things to." "Exactly," she said. That afternoon, everything exploded. I was at the diner when we heard the sirens. Deputy Whitman came running in looking pale. "Sheriff Keller's barricaded himself in his house," he told everyone. "FBI tried to arrest him. He's got weapons." The standoff lasted 14 hours. The whole town was in lockdown. SWAT teams from Lincoln arrived. News helicopters circled overhead. My kids were terrified. We huddled in our living room watching updates on TV. When Keller finally surrendered the next morning, the truth started coming out in pieces. It was worse than anyone imagined. The FBI had placed surveillance equipment in the sheriff's department after Deputy Whitman came forward with suspicions. They recorded Keller talking about how he staged the hit and run that killed Deputy Roberts 3 years earlier, the tragic accident that the whole town had mourned. Roberts had apparently threatened to expose some of Keller's activities. They found evidence connecting him to 3 unsolved murders in the county, dozens of burglaries, a systematic campaign of intimidation against anyone who questioned him or posed a threat to his authority. But the most disturbing discovery came from his house. Hidden in a false wall in his basement was a room filled with surveillance equipment, monitors showing feeds from cameras hidden throughout the town, in the park near the school, and most disturbingly, inside people's homes. My home, the Johnsons, the mayors, the principals. They found labeled binders containing information on nearly 200 county residents. Detailed notes about our routines, our arguments, our security weaknesses, financial problems, medical issues, secrets that could be exploited. The FBI psychological evaluation described Keller as having malignant narcissism with sadistic personality traits. The report said he created an atmosphere of fear and then positioned himself as the protector. I still remember Agent Harmon's words when she explained it to a group of us at the community center. "He terrorized you, then comforted you, then collected your fear like it was some kind of trophy." The whole county fell apart after that. People moved away. Friendships ended over who had defended him and who hadn't. My husband and I almost split up because he initially thought I was overreacting. The worst part was realizing how many times I had confided my fears to Keller himself, sitting in that diner booth, telling him how scared I was about the strange noises around our house, the feeling of being watched, and he'd nod sympathetically, promise to look into it, all while knowing he was the one who'd been outside our windows the night before. It's been almost 20 years, but I still check my locks 3 times before bed. I still can't sleep with the curtains open. I had every camera in our new house inspected by a professional. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I see a flashlight beam moving across my wall. My therapist says it's PTSD. The most terrifying thing isn't what Keller did, it's that we gave him the power to do it. We trusted him because of his position. We told him our fears, our vulnerabilities, our schedules. We invited him into our homes. I still don't know why he chose our town, our county, what made him decide to become the boogeyman while pretending to protect us from him. Sometimes I wonder if he's sitting in his prison cell still getting satisfaction from knowing how deeply he violated our sense of safety. All I know is that I'll never again believe someone just because of the badge they wear, and I'll never stop looking over my shoulder. Story 3. I still wake up some nights thinking I can hear water dripping on the deck outside our bedroom. Even here in Arizona, thousands of miles from that place with nothing but desert stretching for miles. My husband Mark says it's just the irrigation system or the air conditioning or my imagination. But I know better. Some sounds stay with you forever. It's been 12 years since we bought that Cedar Lake house on Lake Champlain, summer of 2011. I remember how excited we were driving up the winding road to Blackwater Cove for the first time as owners. The realtor had already handed us the keys the day before, but we'd stayed in a hotel that night because we wanted to arrive in daylight to see our retirement dream in all its glory. Mark had just turned 52, and I was 49. We'd spent our careers, him as an engineer, me as a doctor, saving for this moment. A place where we could eventually retire, watching the sunset over the water every evening. The price had seemed too good to be true, but we convinced ourselves we were just lucky, smart even, buying when the market was down. 3 owners in 5 years? I had asked the realtor, Rebecca something. I can't remember her last name now, but I remember how she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. People's circumstances change, she'd said with a practiced smile. The Henriksons had to relocate unexpectedly for work, nothing to do with the property. We should have pressed harder, should have wondered why a gorgeous 3-bedroom Cedar Lake house on private waterfront property was selling for almost $200,000 less than comparable properties in the area. But Mark and I were rational people. We didn't believe in ghost stories or superstition. We believed in good fortune and seized opportunities. The first few weeks were everything we'd dreamed. We spent weekends there planning to transition to full-time once we retired in a few years. We bought kayaks, installed a floating dock that extended from the permanent dock, planted flowers. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how the water lapped gently at the shore at night, how clean the air smelled. It was mid-August when I first saw him. Mark had gone back to Boston for 3 days for work, and I'd stayed behind, enjoying a few days alone by the lake. A massive thunderstorm rolled in that evening. I was in the kitchen making tea, watching through the window as lightning illuminated the churning water of the cove. That's when I noticed someone standing on our dock. A figure, motionless in the downpour, dark clothes completely soaked through. I couldn't make out much detail through the rain, but they seemed to be staring directly at the house. At me. I called out, though they couldn't possibly have heard me through the closed windows and the storm. I grabbed my phone to call the sheriff. We were too remote for regular police, but when lightning flashed again, the dock was empty. Sheriff Denton Hargrove came out the next morning. He was in his 60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. I expected him to dismiss my concerns, but instead, he walked carefully around the property, examining the dock with particular attention. "Blackwater gets its name honestly," he finally said, kicking at a pebble on the shore. "Water's deeper here than it looks. Has unusual currents, too." "What does that have to do with someone trespassing on my property?" I asked. He squinted out at the cove. "Probably nothing. Probably just some local kid sneaking around. I'll keep an eye out." But something in his tone made me uneasy. He knew something he wasn't telling me. Mark installed security cameras that weekend, 4 exterior cameras covering all approaches to the house, including the dock and the path up from the road. We weren't taking any chances. For a few weeks, everything was quiet, normal. We almost convinced ourselves I'd just seen a neighbor checking their boat had weathered the storm. Then came September 17th. We were both at the house that weekend. At exactly 10:43 p.m., all 4 exterior cameras simultaneously lost power, just went dead. The interior cameras remained functional, but everything outside was dark. Mark checked the connections, the power supply, everything. He couldn't find any explanation. The cameras came back online at 12:52 a.m., over 2 hours of nothing. Mark stayed up most of the night reviewing the footage from before and after, but there was nothing unusual, just our dark, peaceful property, and then the same view 2 hours later. The next morning, I found the footprints, wet tracks leading from the dock up onto our back deck. They approached the sliding glass door of our bedroom, then simply stopped midway across the deck, as if whoever or whatever had made them had simply vanished. They were small footprints. Child's. That's when I started researching the house's history. It wasn't easy. The local library had limited records, and many long-time residents seemed reluctant to talk about Blackwater Cove. But piece by piece, I put together the story. Richard Mercer had built the house in 2006. A successful businessman from New York, he'd planned it as a vacation home. He sold it just 14 months later, at a significant loss, with no explanation. The Landry family bought it next. They had an 8-year-old daughter. They stayed only 7 months before putting it back on the market. Through a chance conversation with a barista in the local coffee shop, I learned why. Their daughter had developed an imaginary friend shortly after moving in, a soaking wet boy who visited her bedroom window at night. Mrs. Landry had found wet footprints on the hardwood floor of her daughter's room one morning. They moved out the following week. The Henriksons were next. They stayed barely long enough to unpack before selling to us. But it was what happened before the house was even built that truly chilled me. In 1998, there was a boating accident in Blackwater Cove. A local man, Timothy Whelan, and his 9-year-old son Andrew had taken their small fishing boat out late one afternoon. A sudden storm capsized the boat. Timothy's body was recovered the next day, but despite extensive searches involving divers, sonar, and dragging operations, Andrew's body was never found. I found a dusty copy of the local newspaper with the story. A quote from one of the rescue divers caught my attention. "Blackwater Cove has some of the strangest underwater topography I've ever seen. It drops off to unusual depths very close to shore, and the currents down there don't make any sense. They create a kind of perpetual holding pattern for anything that enters the water." But it was the statement from the EMT who had tried to revive Timothy Whelan that truly haunted me. According to the article before he died, Timothy had repeatedly muttered the same phrase, "He won't let go. At the bottom, he won't let go." I didn't tell Mark everything I'd discovered, just enough that we agreed to install more cameras and motion sensor lights. We considered selling, but the practical side of us, the engineer and the doctor, resisted. We'd invested in this property. There had to be rational explanations. The night everything changed was in early October. We'd gone to bed around 11, but I was still awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of fingernails dragging slowly across the outside of our bedroom window. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Then the drip of water on the deck. I nudged Mark awake, my heart pounding so hard I could barely speak. He grabbed the baseball bat we'd started keeping beside the bed and went to investigate, while I pulled up the security camera feeds on my tablet. I watched him step out onto the deck. The motion lights had activated, bathing everything in harsh brightness. I could see him directly through our bedroom window and simultaneously on the security monitor. He looked around, called out, found nothing. "Mark," I called through the open sliding door. "Come back inside." On both the monitor and through my direct view, I could see Mark alone on the deck. But through the security system's audio, I heard something that froze my blood. A child's voice, whispering, "He's here with me now." We left that night, threw essential items in our suitcases and drove until sunrise. We checked into a hotel in Albany and tried to make sense of what was happening. Mark wanted to go back, to face whatever it was rationally. I refused. Eventually, we compromised. Mark would return alone, in daylight, to properly secure the house and retrieve more of our belongings. I made him promise to leave before dark. While he was gone, I did one last thing. I ordered a digital voice recorder from a local electronics store and asked him to leave it running in the house before he left. When he returned to Albany that evening, visibly shaken but insisting he'd encountered nothing unusual, I didn't immediately tell him about the recorder. It wasn't until we were back in Boston, having arranged for a property management company to handle the house while we decided what to do, that I finally listened to the recording. Most of it was just the normal sounds of an empty house, the refrigerator humming, the heating system clicking on and off, the occasional creak of wood contracting as the temperature dropped. But about 2 hours after Mark had left, I heard it. A child's voice, clear as day. "When are they coming back? I'm cold." And then, most terrifying of all, an adult male voice responding, "Soon. I told you they always come back." We put the house on the market the next day. It sold quickly, well below market value, to a couple from Connecticut who thought they were getting an incredible deal. They lasted 16 months. Since then, the property has changed hands 5 more times. No owner has stayed longer than 18 months. The longest was a paranormal researcher who bought it in 2017, intending to document the phenomena. He left after 7 weeks and has refused all interviews since. I've spent years trying to understand what happened at Blackwater Cove. I've consulted with hydrologists who confirm the unusual depth and current patterns. I've spoken with the few locals willing to talk about the Whelan accident. Most just shake their heads and say the cove has always been strange. Mark and I live in Arizona now, as far from large bodies of water as we could reasonably get. He's mostly put it behind him, or at least pretends he has. Sometimes I catch him staring at nothing, and I know he's remembering. Whatever happened to Andrew Whelan back in 1998, I don't believe he's alone down there anymore. And I don't believe he, or whatever keeps him company, wants to be alone. Sometimes I wonder about the current owners, a young family with 2 children who bought the place last spring. I've thought about warning them, but what would I say? That I heard a dead child whispering through a security system? That I have a recording of 2 voices that shouldn't exist? All I know is that Blackwater gets its name honestly, and the water there is much, much deeper than it looks. Story 4. I'm only writing this down because I literally have no one else to tell. None of my former colleagues want to talk about it. The department shrink thinks I'm suffering from PTSD and trauma-induced hallucinations. My wife left 6 months ago because she couldn't handle my night terrors anymore. But I know what I saw in that evidence room. I know what happened at the 23rd Precinct. It was early February 1988. Winter in Chicago is always brutal, but that particular week was exceptionally cold, the kind where your lungs burn when you breathe outside. I'd been with the Chicago PD for almost 11 years by then, working my way up to detective. Evidence management wasn't glamorous, but I took pride in keeping things organized. The 23rd was an older building, all brick and narrow hallways with those flickering fluorescent lights that give you headaches after 8 hours. That Tuesday started like any other. I was doing a routine quarterly audit of cold cases, checking seals, confirming chain of custody documentation, that kind of thing. Nothing unusual until I got to a section of storage containing evidence from homicides from the 70s. Something felt off. The boxes weren't arranged the way I remembered them. At first, I thought maybe someone had been sloppy during retrieval, but when I started checking box numbers against the log, I realized 14 cases had been accessed without documentation. That's a serious breach of protocol, career-ending stuff. But what really sent chills down my spine wasn't the unauthorized access, it was how the boxes had been arranged. They formed a pattern, not random at all. When I stepped back and looked at the shelf from a distance, the 14 disturbed boxes created a sequence of numbers. I'd seen enough coordinate notations in my time to recognize longitude and latitude. I wrote them down. feeling ridiculous but unable to shake the feeling that this was deliberate. As I was documenting the discrepancy, I heard something that still haunts me, whispering, like multiple people having a hushed conversation just around the corner of the shelving unit. The evidence room was in the basement, accessible only with keycard clearance, and I was absolutely alone. I called out, thinking maybe the janitor had come in, but the whispering stopped immediately. I told myself I was being paranoid, but then it started again, multiple voices discussing case details. I recognized specific names from the tampered cases. I pulled out my mini cassette recorder, I always carried one for note-taking, and hit record, walking slowly toward the sound. The whispering stopped again when I turned the corner. Nobody was there. I reported the evidence tampering to Lieutenant Hargrove that afternoon. He was concerned but seemed to think it was probably an internal procedural error rather than anything sinister. I didn't mention the whispering. I'd learned long ago that cops who hear things get desk duty and mandatory psych evals. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those coordinates. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and pulled out a map of Chicago. The location was an abandoned warehouse near the old stockyards, about 20 minutes from the precinct. I knew I should wait, follow protocol, get a team together. But something about this felt urgent, personal. I arrived at the warehouse just after dawn. The place had been empty for years, broken windows, graffiti, the usual urban decay. I drew my service weapon before entering, telling myself I was being cautious, not paranoid. The interior was mostly empty, except for some scattered debris and a single metal filing cabinet in the center of the main floor. It was in pristine condition, not a speck of dust or rust, completely out of place in the dilapidated building. Inside that cabinet were 14 folders, one for each of the tampered cases, but they weren't case files. They were personnel files, detailed dossiers on every officer who had handled the evidence over the years, including me. My entire career was documented, along with personal information no one should have had access to, my childhood address, my parents' medical records, even notes about a knee injury I'd had in high school that wasn't in any official record. But the most disturbing thing was the photographs. Crime scene photos I'd never seen before, showing details of the murders that weren't in the official files. And in the background of several photos, barely visible in shadows or reflections, was the same figure, a uniformed officer watching the scene. I couldn't make out the face, but something about the posture seemed familiar. I gathered everything and brought it back to the precinct. Lieutenant Hargrove was furious I'd gone to the warehouse alone, but became silent when he saw the files. He ordered me to secure everything in his office and not discuss it with anyone. That's when he assigned Officer James Chen to overnight duty in the evidence room, to keep an eye on things. Chen was a good cop, only 34, with a wife and 2 kids. He'd just transferred to our precinct 3 months earlier. That night was his first solo shift in evidence. He disappeared during that shift. The security logs showed he entered at 11:15 p.m. but never signed out. His patrol car was still in the lot the next morning. We formed search parties, checked hospitals, put out an APB, the works, 72 hours. Later we found him inside a sealed evidence locker that had been locked from the inside. That should have been impossible. Those lockers can't be locked from inside, and they're not airtight. There's no way he could have survived in there for 3 days. But the thing is, he didn't look like he'd been dead for hours. He looked like he'd been dead for decades. His hair had gone completely white. His skin was withered like a man in his 90s. The medical examiner said his cellular structure showed advanced aging equivalent to someone who'd lived well into their 80s, despite being only 34. His service weapon was unfired, clutched in his hand, and his radio was tuned to a frequency we don't use. While we were dealing with Chen's death, I remembered the recording I'd made in the evidence room. I found my cassette recorder and played it back. The whispering was there, clearer on the tape than it had been in person. Multiple voices discussing case details, but the medical examiner was able to identify 2 of them as officers who had died years ago. One had been killed in the line of duty in 1976. The other had died of cancer in 1981. Both had worked the original crime scenes of the tampered cases. The department brought in officers Patricia Williams and Robert Nolan from Internal Affairs to investigate. They were seasoned professionals, not the type to spook easily. They set up surveillance equipment in the evidence room and began a thorough inventory. 3 days into their investigation, Williams came running into the squad room at 2 in the afternoon, white as a sheet. She claimed she'd seen 3 uniformed officers walking between the shelves who vanished when she called out to them. When she reviewed the security footage, there was no one there, but the temperature in that section of the room had dropped nearly 20 degrees according to the equipment readings. Nolan laughed it off, said Williams was working too hard. He volunteered to take the night shift alone. Around 1:30 in the morning, the precinct was jolted awake by gunshots from the evidence room. When backup arrived, they found Nolan emptying his clip into an empty corner, screaming about officers who wouldn't stay dead. The security footage showed him firing at nothing, but if you listened carefully to the audio, you could hear footsteps approaching him that didn't match any visible person. Both Williams and Nolan died within the week, separate cardiac events, despite both being in excellent health and in their 40s. The medical examiner found no explanation, though he noted their heart tissue showed cellular degradation consistent with extreme old age. Then the computer system in the evidence room started generating reports on its own. This was 1988. Our system was basic, just inventory tracking and simple databases. But it began printing out detailed case reports for crimes that hadn't happened yet. Domestic violence calls with addresses and names, robbery details with specific items taken. At first we thought it was a sick prank, but then the calls started coming in. 94% accuracy. The crimes happened exactly as the reports predicted, sometimes weeks in advance. Lieutenant Hargrove ordered a complete evacuation of the evidence facility. They brought in specialists, scientists, engineers, even a couple of paranormal researchers, though that was kept quiet. Nobody could explain what was happening. The electronic equipment would malfunction, batteries would drain instantly, and people reported feeling watched constantly. The final straw came when the night cleaning crew refused to enter the building after finding all the evidence boxes rearranged into a perfect circle in the main hall, something that would have taken hours and multiple people to accomplish in the 15 minutes they'd stepped out for a smoke break. The department sealed the facility in April. They transferred what evidence they could to other precincts, but many items were lost in the process. The building itself was demolished in 1990 after 3 separate construction companies refused to complete renovations. Here's the part nobody talks about. During demolition, workers found evidence bags embedded in the foundation, preserved perfectly despite being 30 years old and sealed in concrete that had been poured before the bags even existed. The items inside matched evidence that had gone missing during the original incident. I transferred out of the 23rd after that. Most of us did. The department established new protocols for what they called temporarily displaced evidence events, though you won't find that in any official manual. It's passed down verbally from one evidence manager to the next. I still have nightmares about that evidence room, about finding Chen, about the whispering. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and hear that same whispering coming from my closet. My ex-wife said I would have conversations in my sleep, reciting case details from investigations I'd never worked on. Last month, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph of me entering that warehouse back in 1988. In the background, watching from the shadows, was a uniformed officer I finally recognized. It was me, as I look now, 35 years later. I don't know what happened in that evidence room. I don't know if it was some kind of temporal anomaly, or if there are aspects of police work that somehow transcend what we understand about time and reality. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that somewhere in Chicago there's an evidence box with my name on it documenting a death that hasn't happened yet. Story 5. I haven't slept properly in months. I keep thinking about what happened, and I'm only writing this down now because my therapist thinks it might help. I don't know if anyone will believe me. Sometimes I don't even believe myself. It started back in 2013 when my dad inherited that house on Echo Lake from my grandfather. I was 14 then, and my sister Meredith was 11. Mom and Dad were excited about having a vacation place, Dad especially. He'd grown up visiting that lake and had all these stories about swimming there as a kid. The house itself was pretty amazing. This big modern place with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the water, a private dock, the works. Echo Lake got its name because of how sound bounces off the water. Dad told us the local Native Americans used to call it the place where the dead speak. I thought that was cool in a creepy way, but I didn't take it seriously. Not then anyway. The first weird thing happened that August. We'd been at the house for about a week, just doing normal vacation stuff. Swimming, hiking, board games at night. I remember it was super hot that summer and the house didn't have great air conditioning, so we all slept with our windows open. I woke up at exactly 2:17 in the morning. I remember looking at my phone to check the time. There were voices coming from the deck. It sounded like a bunch of people having a conversation. At first, I thought maybe some teenagers had snuck onto our property to party or something, but when I listened closer, something felt off. The voices didn't sound normal. They were muffled and kind of distorted, like when you hear someone talking underwater. I went to my parents' room, and they were already awake. Dad was looking out the window with this confused expression. "There's nobody there," he said, but we could all hear the voices plain as day. It sounded like a woman and maybe a little kid talking, but their words were garbled. Dad grabbed his phone and pulled up the security camera feed. The deck was completely empty. No one was there, but the camera's audio was picking up the voices too. We all just stood there, staring at the empty deck on the screen, while these voices kept talking. Dad went downstairs to check, taking a baseball bat with him. I remember Mom telling him to be careful, and Meredith was crying because she was scared. When Dad came back, he looked pale. "There's nobody out there," he said, "but the voices are louder on the deck." The next morning, Dad reviewed the security footage. You could hear the voices clearly on the recording, but you couldn't see anyone. He sent the audio to a friend of his who worked with sound engineering, and the guy said there was something weird about it, like it was English, but not quite, like the words were almost familiar, but just wrong somehow. We tried to brush it off as some weird acoustic thing. Dad was a neurologist, so he started talking about how the lake's shape might create strange sound effects, or how our brains might misinterpret certain frequencies. We almost convinced ourselves it was nothing, but it happened again the next summer, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. Always the same kind of voices, a woman and what sounded like a child. And they started to say things we had said earlier, like one night at dinner, I was complaining about a girl at school, and that night, in those weird voices, I heard my exact words repeated back. It freaked me out so bad I couldn't sleep for days. Then came July 17th, 2014. That's the night everything got worse. We all woke up to Meredith's voice screaming for help from the dock. Dad literally flew out of bed and ran downstairs, with Mom and me right behind him. The weird thing was, when we passed Meredith's room, she was there, sound asleep in her bed. Mom stayed with Meredith while Dad and I ran down to the dock. There was nobody there, but the wood was wet, like someone had just climbed out of the water. Dad checked the security footage later, and that's when we saw it. There was this figure at the end of the dock. It looked like a woman, but her clothes were old-fashioned, like from 100 years ago or something. And she moved wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Like she was being filmed underwater, and then the footage was being played on land. All jerky and fluid at the same time. After that night, Meredith refused to go near the lake. She said she had dreams about the people in the water, asking her to visit them. Mom wanted to sell the house, but Dad was obsessed with figuring out what was happening. He started bringing his research equipment from the hospital, recording devices, sensors, all kinds of stuff. In May 2015, Dad went to the house alone to set up some experiments. He called Mom that night, completely freaked out. He said he'd seen wet footprints appear on the dock, one after another, like someone invisible was walking up from the lake. Then he found lake water on his bedroom floor, but it wasn't just random puddles. It was arranged in patterns that looked like writing. When we went back as a family that June, Dad brought some colleagues from the hospital. They set up cameras and sensors everywhere. That's the night Meredith sleepwalked down to the dock. The security footage is the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. My 11-year-old sister standing at the edge of the dock in her pajamas, talking to the empty air, except it wasn't empty. The microphones picked up voices answering her. They asked if she wanted to see where they lived. Meredith said she couldn't swim that far. And then this hollow, echoing woman's voice said, "You won't need to swim." That's when Dad ran out and grabbed Meredith. She woke up screaming, saying the water people were angry now because Dad had interrupted them. We didn't go back to the house after that. Meredith started having nightmares every night, and Mom took her to therapy. Dad became obsessed with researching the lake's history. He found old newspapers reporting drownings going back to the 1800s. Always people who walked into the lake at night and never came back. In May 2016, Dad went back to the house alone to pack things up. He said he was going to put it on the market. He called Mom that night, and I remember hearing his voice. He sounded excited and scared at the same time. He said there were lights moving under the surface of the lake and the voices were louder than ever. "They're coming from underwater," he told Mom. "I think there's something down there." That was the last time we heard from him. When he didn't call the next morning, Mom contacted the local police. They found Dad's car in the driveway, his phone on the deck, and wet footprints leading from the lake to the dock, then disappearing. There was a circle of water on the dock, like someone had stood there dripping for a long time. They searched the lake for days but never found his body. I didn't believe he was dead. I kept telling Mom that the water people had taken him, but she thought I was just having trouble accepting his disappearance. Then, 14 months later, the security system sent an alert to Mom's phone. The motion sensors had picked something up. The footage showed Dad walking up from the lake. He was soaking wet and his skin looked weird, too pale and kind of bluish. He just stood there staring at the house and repeating the same thing over and over. "It isn't what we thought. There's a whole city down there." Then he turned around and walked back into the lake. Mom showed the footage to the police, but they thought it was some sick prank. A forensic guy did confirm that the wet footprints matched Dad's shoe size and stride pattern, though. A few months later, this research team got permission to investigate the lake. They had all this fancy equipment, ground-penetrating sonar, water composition analyzers, underwater drones. They found weird structures at the bottom of the lake that they said couldn't have formed naturally, and the water at the deepest part had chemical properties they couldn't explain. One of the researchers, this guy named David Lanier, he was doing a night observation shift when he radioed his team about seeing lights under the water. The other researchers said he sounded perfectly calm when he put down his radio, walked to the end of the dock, and dove in. They never found his body either. The research project was shut down after that. The house has been empty ever since. Mom won't even talk about selling it anymore. She just pretends it doesn't exist. Last winter, a wildlife camera set up near the lake caught something. 3 people walking out of the water just after midnight. The footage is grainy, but they look like Dad, Mom, and me. But I was at college when this was recorded, and Mom was at home. The figures stood at the shore for exactly 12 minutes before walking back into the lake. The way they moved was all wrong, like they were still partly underwater. I haven't told Mom about this footage. I found it when I was going through the research team's abandoned files. I don't know what to do with it. Sometimes I dream about the lake now. I hear voices calling my name, telling me they miss me, asking when I'm coming home. They sound like my family, but not quite right. The weirdest part is that in my dreams I miss them too. I miss them like they're my real family, and this life is the fake one. Sometimes I wake up and feel disappointed that I'm in my apartment and not there, wherever there is. Last week I found myself researching how to get to Echo Lake. I've caught myself packing a bag twice now without even realizing what I was doing. I'm scared of what's happening to me, but I'm more scared that I'm starting to want it. I don't know how much longer I can stay away. The water is calling me home. Story 6. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night at Mario's Pizzeria. It's been 3 months, and I still wake up in cold sweats sometimes. I've worked the night shift, there for almost 2 years now, and I normally love it. Seriously, it's perfect for me. I'm 23, taking classes during the day, and I actually enjoy the solitude of working alone from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. Most nights, I just make a few pizzas for the occasional drunk college kids, then spend the rest of the time studying or watching stuff on my phone. This all happened on a Tuesday night back in March. It started like any other shift. I came in, relieved Darren, the evening guy, and settled in for what I thought would be another quiet night. For the first few hours, everything was normal. I had a couple of deliveries, made a few pizzas for walk-ins, and cleaned up the kitchen. Nothing out of the ordinary. Around 1 in the morning, things got weird. The little bell above the door jingled. You know, that annoying bell that alerts you when someone walks in. I was in the back kneading dough for the morning rush, so I quickly washed my hands and went to the front counter. No one was there. I figured maybe someone had opened the door and changed their mind, or maybe the wind had somehow caught it just right. Our door is kind of crappy. Mr. Giordano, the owner, is too cheap to fix half the stuff in that place. I shrugged it off and went back to prepping. 15 minutes later, it happened again. The bell rang, but this time I was closer to the front, so I got to the counter faster. Again, nobody there. This time I actually went to the door and looked outside. Our pizzeria is in this small strip mall, and at that hour, the parking lot was completely empty except for my car. The streetlights cast this sickly yellow glow over everything, but I could clearly see there wasn't a soul around. I started getting a little creeped out, so I double-checked that the door was properly closed and went back to work. I tried to shake it off as the door being faulty or something, but it was still unsettling. Then, not even 10 minutes later, the bell rang. Again! At this point, I was getting really annoyed. I stormed to the front, ready to catch whoever was messing with me, but once again there was nobody there. I went outside and walked around the immediate area, checking behind the dumpsters and peering into the shadows of the neighboring closed businesses. Nothing. I went back inside and locked the door. We're technically not supposed to lock up until closing time at 6, but screw that. If someone legitimate wanted pizza, they could knock and I'd let them in. I just didn't want to keep dealing with the phantom doorbell. For a while, things were quiet again. I managed to get all my prep work done for the morning shift and even had time to study for my economics exam. Around 4 in the morning, I decided to count the register early. We don't keep much cash on hand during the night shift, company policy, but I still needed to make sure everything balanced for my report. That's when I felt it. You know that feeling when you suddenly realize you're not alone? The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I got this heavy, sinking feeling in my stomach. It was like the air in the room had suddenly become thick and hard to breathe. I slowly turned around and my heart nearly stopped. There was a man standing just a few feet away from me, on the customer side of the counter. I never heard him come in. The doorbell hadn't rung. He was just there. He was wearing all black, a tattered hoodie with the hood pulled up, covering part of his face, but not enough to hide his eyes. God, those eyes. They were sunken deep into his face, bloodshot to the point where they looked almost red in the fluorescent lighting. They didn't look right. There was no life behind them, no emotion, just this empty, dead stare fixed directly on me. The worst part, he was holding a knife in his left hand. Not a small pocket knife, but a large kitchen knife with a serrated edge. His knuckles were white from gripping it so tightly. I completely froze. My mind was racing with a million thoughts, but my body wouldn't move. We just stood there staring at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Finally, my voice came back to me. "Take the money," I stammered, gesturing weakly toward the register. "There's not much, but take it, please." He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. He just kept staring at me with those horrible eyes, gripping that knife. That's when I realized how bad my situation really was. The counter at Mario's is shaped like an L, with the register at the corner. I was standing at the register, and this guy was blocking the only way out from behind the counter. If I wanted to escape, I'd have to run right past him. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My palms were sweaty and I felt like I might throw up. I looked around desperately for a weapon, a pizza cutter, a rolling pin, anything, but there was nothing within reach. Then he took a step toward me, still not saying a word. I panicked. In that moment, my only thought was that I needed to get out. Without really thinking it through, I lunged forward and tried to vault over the counter. I wasn't graceful about it. My foot caught on the edge, and I crashed hard onto the floor on the customer side. Pain shot through my elbow and hip, but adrenaline was pumping so hard that I barely felt it. I scrambled to my feet, expecting to feel the knife plunge into my back at any second. When I looked up, the man's face had changed. That empty expression was gone, replaced by something worse, rage. His mouth twisted into this horrible grimace, showing yellowed teeth. He lunged toward me, knife raised. I bolted for the door, fumbling with the lock I'd set earlier. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get it open. I heard his footsteps right behind me, getting closer. Finally, the lock gave way, and I threw the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. I ran into the street. Without looking back, sprinting faster than I ever have in my life. I didn't stop until I reached the gas station 2 blocks away. The attendant took one look at my face and let me behind the counter where I called the police, still trembling uncontrollably. The cops arrived at the pizzeria within 5 minutes, but by then the man was gone. What they found, though, made my blood run cold. The place was trashed, chairs overturned, pizza dough scattered everywhere, and the register drawer pulled out and emptied. But the worst part was my car in the parking lot. The guy had used his knife to scratch deep gouges all over it. The doors, the hood, everywhere. When the police reviewed the security footage, we made an even more disturbing discovery. That bell ringing with no one there. It wasn't a malfunction. The footage showed the man approaching the door each time, opening it just enough to make the bell ring, then ducking out of sight. He'd been watching me through the window the whole time, seeing how I reacted, where I looked, studying my movements. The most terrifying part, based on the footage timestamps, he had actually entered the pizzeria almost an hour before I saw him. He'd been hiding inside, somewhere in the shadows of the dining area, watching me work. All that time, while I was making dough and counting the register, he was there, just waiting. The police never caught him. They told me it was probably just a robbery gone weird, but I don't believe that. He didn't take the money when I offered it. He didn't say anything or make any demands. He just stood there with that knife and those dead eyes. Sometimes I think he wasn't there for the money at all. He was there for me. I quit that job the next day. No amount of money is worth going back there. I still can't be alone at night, and I check behind the shower curtain every single time I go to the bathroom. I keep replaying that night in my head, wondering what would have happened if I hadn't managed to get away. The worst part is not knowing why. Why me? Why that night? And where is he now? I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching, waiting for another night shift worker alone in some empty place. Story 7. I've been working 2 jobs for almost a year now. My day job pays the bills, but my evening gig delivering food is what's helping me save up for my own place. Living with roommates at 28 isn't ideal, especially when they're as inconsiderate as mine. So I've been hustling hard, taking as many deliveries as possible, especially on weekends when tips are better. Last Friday started like any other delivery night. I clocked in around 6:30, right after wolfing down a quick sandwich in my car. The app was blowing up with orders, payday weekend and all that. My first few deliveries were smooth: apartment complexes, suburban homes, the usual spots around Ridgemont. Tips were surprisingly good. I'd already made about $70 in tips alone by 10:30, which is pretty damn good for our small town. As the night went on, things started slowing down. By 11, I was considering calling it quits. My feet were killing me from running up and down apartment stairs all night, and I had an early shift at my day job the next morning. But I kept thinking about how close I was to having enough saved for the security deposit on that apartment I'd been eyeing. Just one more good one, I told myself, scrolling through the available orders on my phone. That's when I saw it. a $20 tip already added to an order that was only about 15 minutes away. The delivery fee was higher too because of the distance, seemed like a no-brainer. I accepted it immediately and picked up the food from this Thai place that stays open late. The address wasn't one I recognized, but that's not unusual. I've been delivering for months and still discover new neighborhoods all the time. The GPS took me toward the northwestern edge of town, an area I rarely visit. As I drove further from the center of Ridgemont, the houses became more spread out, with larger plots of land between them. Eventually, the residential streets gave way to a more rural setting with fewer streetlights. I kept glancing at my phone, making sure I was still on the right track. The GPS instructed me to turn onto a gravel road that cut through a wooded area. It was well maintained, not full of potholes like some of the back roads around here, so I figured it must lead somewhere legitimate. After driving for about 3 minutes on this road, surrounded by nothing but trees, I started to wonder if I'd made a wrong turn. Just as I was about to pull over and double-check the address, I spotted a simple wooden gate ahead. It wasn't closed exactly. There was just a chain stretched across the entrance, but it was lying on the ground. I slowed down, my headlights illuminating a small sign that read, Ridgemont Forest Reserve. Below that, in smaller letters, was information about hours and regulations that I couldn't read from my car. I hesitated, wondering if I should just mark the delivery as undeliverable and head back. But that $20 tip kept me going. Maybe they lived in a ranger's house or something. I drove past the lowered chain and continued down the path until it opened into a small clearing that looked like a parking area. After turning off my engine, I grabbed the food and checked my phone again. The pin showed I was at the right location, but there wasn't a house in sight, just trees and darkness. I was starting to feel really uneasy when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was the customer. "Hello?" I answered, trying to sound professional despite my growing anxiety. "Hey, you the delivery guy?" The voice on the other end was deep and raspy, like someone who'd been smoking for 40 years or had a really bad cold. "Yeah, I'm at the Forest Reserve, but I don't see any." "We're camping about 200 yards in," he interrupted. "You'll see our fire. Just follow the main trail from the parking area." "Camping?" I repeated, confused. "Is that allowed here?" "Yeah, certain days they permit overnight stays. We're having a little get-together. Good tips for you if you bring it to us. We don't want to leave the fire unattended." That made enough sense to quiet my suspicions. I mean, I'm not exactly an expert on Forest Reserve regulations. And the extra tip incentive worked. I was already imagining adding another 10 or 20 to my night's earnings. "All right, I'll head your way," I said, hanging up and turning on my phone's flashlight. The main trail was easy enough to find, starting at the edge of the clearing. As I walked deeper into the woods, I became increasingly aware of how quiet it was. If there was a group having a get-together, shouldn't I hear voices, laughter, music, something? All I could hear was my own footsteps crunching on the path and the occasional rustle of leaves in the light breeze. No distant chatter, no sounds of people enjoying themselves around a campfire, just silence. After walking for what felt like longer than 200 yards, I finally spotted an orange glow through the trees. Relief washed over me. At least there actually was a fire. I wasn't being completely scammed or led into the middle of nowhere for nothing. As I approached the source of the light, my relief quickly evaporated. There was indeed a small campfire, neatly contained in a ring of stones. But there were no people, no chairs around the fire, no tents, no coolers full of beer, nothing that would indicate anyone was camping here. I stood there for a moment, the bag of now lukewarm Thai food still in my hand, trying to make sense of the situation. Had they stepped away for a bathroom break? All of them at once? But there weren't even any personal belongings around. That's when I heard it. A twig snapping somewhere in the darkness. Behind me, I spun around, my phone's flashlight beam cutting through the night, but it wasn't powerful enough to penetrate very far into the trees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared even to my own ears. "I've got your delivery." No response. I swept my light back and forth, and that's when I caught a glimpse of something, or someone, standing between two trees about 30 feet away. I couldn't make out details, just a dark silhouette watching me. My heart started hammering in my chest. This wasn't right. None of this was right. "I'm just going to leave your food here by the fire," I announced to whoever was watching, trying to keep my voice steady. "Have a good night." I set the bag down and started backing away, not wanting to turn my back on whoever was out there. As I did, the figure moved. I could tell it was a man now, stepped forward into the faint glow cast by the fire. He was tall, at least 6'2", with dark hair and stubble. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, normal enough camping clothes, but something about him made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way he moved, too fluid and deliberate, or maybe it was his expression. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry about that," he said, and I recognized the raspy voice from the phone. "I was just checking something in the woods. Thanks for bringing this all the way out." He took another step toward me, and I noticed his hands. They were empty. No wallet to give me that promised extra tip. No phone that he might have used to call me. Nothing. "Where's everyone else?" I asked, still backing away. "You said you were having a get-together." His smile widened, showing teeth. "They're coming. Should be here any minute." Something in his tone made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I don't know how I knew, but in that moment I was certain he was lying. There was no group. There never had been. "Well, enjoy your food," I said, then turned and started walking quickly back, toward the trail. "Wait," he called after me, "don't you want your tip?" I didn't answer. I didn't look back. I just walked faster until I was off the firelight, then broke into a run once I hit the main trail. The whole time I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, to feel a hand grab my shoulder, but nothing happened. When I finally burst out of the trees and into the parking clearing, I sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. As soon as the engine roared to life, I flipped on my high beams, and that's when I saw him, the man from the campfire, standing at the edge of the woods, just watching me. I threw the car into reverse, spun around and headed for the exit, driving too fast for a gravel road. When I reached the gate, my headlights revealed something that made my blood run cold. The chain that had been lying on the ground was now padlocked through the gate posts, blocking my exit. In my rearview mirror, I could see headlights. Another vehicle was coming down the road from the parking area. Panic surged through me. I couldn't go back, and I couldn't go forward through the chained gate. Without thinking too much about it, I veered off the gravel road and onto the grass beside the gate. It was risky. There were shallow ditches on either side, but my Honda Civic was small enough that I thought I might be able to squeeze past the gate post. The undercarriage scraped horribly against something, and for a terrifying moment I thought I was stuck. But then the car lurched forward and I was through, back on the gravel road on the other side of the gate. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main road, and even then I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see headlights following me. But there were none. When I got home, I was still so shaken that my roommate actually asked if I was okay, and he never notices anything. I told him I'd nearly hit a deer. The next morning, I looked up the Ridgemont Forest Reserve online. It closes at 8 p.m. every night. Camping is strictly prohibited, so are fires of any kind. I reported the incident to the police, but they didn't seem particularly concerned. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I never heard anything back. I also reported it to the delivery app company, who just told me to avoid accepting deliveries to unfamiliar areas after dark. It's been a week, and I still can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something terrible. I've stopped doing deliveries altogether. The extra money isn't worth what almost happened to me in those woods. Whatever that man had planned, I'm certain it wasn't just to eat Thai food around a campfire. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed for that tip, or if my car had gotten stuck trying to bypass that gate. I don't think I'd be here writing this. Story 8. I've been struggling with whether to share this for months now. I guess typing it out might help me process what happened, even though I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about it. This happened last October when I was driving back to Prince George after visiting my aunt in Prince Rupert. I'm a 23-year-old Indigenous woman from the Carrier Nation. Growing up, my mom and grandma drilled it into me never to travel Highway 16 alone. They'd tell me stories about the women who vanished, some of them relatives of friends, some just faces on missing posters that never came home. I always took those warnings seriously. Always. Until that night. My car had been making this weird rattling noise for weeks, but I kept putting off getting it checked. Stupid, I know. My aunt had been sick, though, and I needed to see her. I figured the car would hold up for one more trip. I planned to drive back during daylight, but my aunt had a bad day and I couldn't bring myself to leave until I knew she was feeling better. By the time I left Prince Rupert, it was already getting dark. The autumn sun sets early up north and the clouds made it even darker. I remember checking my gas, 3/4 full, and making sure my phone was charged before hitting the road. I even texted my roommate that I was leaving and would be home around midnight. The first hour of driving was fine. Traffic was basically non-existent, just the occasional semi and maybe 2 other cars. The radio kept cutting out between towns, so I put on a playlist. About halfway to Terrace, that's when my car started making this horrible grinding sound, way worse than before. I slowed down, hoping it would stop, but then the dashboard lit up with warning lights. Great. Just great. I pulled over onto the shoulder and turned on my hazards. When I got out to check under the hood, I realized how completely alone I was. The forest pressed in on both sides of the highway, thick and dark, no streetlights, no houses, nothing but trees and darkness stretching for miles. Opening the hood, I had no idea what I was looking at. I'm not a mechanic. I took a photo and sent it to my cousin who knows about cars, but the message wouldn't go through. No service. That's when I really started to worry. I got back in my car and tried to start it again. The engine turned over but made this horrible screeching noise. I shut it off immediately. Sitting there, I weighed my options. I could wait for someone to drive by and flag them down, but my mum's warnings echoed in my head. Never trust strangers on that highway. I could try walking, but the nearest town was at least 15 kilometers away, and walking along Highway 16 at night, no way. I decided to try driving very slowly to see if I could limp to the next town. The car moved, but the noise got worse, and then there was a loud clunk and it died completely. This time it wouldn't start at all. It was now around 9 in the evening. The temperature was dropping fast. October. Nights get really cold up here. I had a blanket in the back seat and a half-empty water bottle. My phone showed no service, but I kept it off to save the battery in case I got into range. About 20 minutes later, headlights appeared in my rear-view mirror. I felt this weird mix of relief and dread. As the vehicle slowed down, I could see it was an older model pickup truck, dark-colored. It pulled up behind me and sat there for a minute with the high beams on, blinding me in the mirrors. A man got out. From what I could see in my side mirror, he was tall, maybe in his 40s or 50s, wearing a baseball cap and work clothes. He approached slowly. I cracked my window just an inch. "Car trouble?" he asked. His voice sounded normal enough, but something about him made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I nodded. "It just died on me. I've called for help, though," I lied. "My brother's coming with a tow truck. Should be here any minute." The man looked up and down the empty highway. We both knew no one was coming. "That so?" he said, peering at me through the crack in the window. "Well, I'm headed toward Terrace. I could give you a lift to the gas station. They've got a mechanic there." Every instinct told me not to go with him. I'm not normally paranoid, but on that highway, with all those stories... "I'm fine, thanks," I said. "My brother will be here soon." He didn't leave right away. He stood there looking at my car, then at me. "Suit yourself," he finally said. "Might be a long wait out here. Nights get cold." As he walked back to his truck, I locked my doors again, double-checking them. He sat in his truck for what felt like forever, just idling there behind me with his lights on. Then, without another word, he drove off. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. Something felt wrong. Really wrong. About 10 minutes later, I saw headlights again, coming from the opposite direction. A small SUV slowed down as it passed me, then pulled over about 50 meters ahead. A woman got out. I could just make out her silhouette in the darkness. She approached cautiously. "Need help?" she called out when she was still several meters away. I felt myself relax a little. She was indigenous like me, maybe in her 30s, with a kind face. I opened my door slightly. "My car broke down," I explained. "No cell service out here." She nodded. "I'm headed to Prince George. I can give you a ride to somewhere with cell service if you want." I hesitated. On one hand, I just refused a ride from the man. On the other, she was a woman, and something about her seemed trustworthy. Plus, I was getting colder by the minute. "Let me grab my bag," I said, reaching into the back seat for my overnight bag and my blanket. I locked my car and followed her to her SUV. As we drove, she introduced herself as Melissa. She was a nurse who worked in Prince Rupert but lived in Smithers. We talked about normal things: work, the weather, how bad the potholes were getting. It felt safe. About 15 minutes later, we passed a dark pickup truck parked on the side of the road, the same one that had stopped for me earlier. I felt a chill run through me. "That's the guy who offered me a ride before you came," I told Melissa. She glanced in her rearview mirror. "Weird place to stop if he was heading to Terrace," she said quietly. We drove in silence for a few minutes. Then I noticed the truck's headlights behind us. "He's following us," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Melissa pressed the accelerator a little harder. "Could be coincidence," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. The truck stayed behind us, keeping the same distance, for the next 20 kilometers. Whenever Melissa sped up, he sped up too. "There's a 24-hour gas station coming up in about 10 minutes, Melissa said. "We'll stop there. There'll be people around." I kept watching the truck in the side mirror. It maintained its distance, headlights bright against the darkness. When we reached the gas station, Melissa pulled in quickly and parked right in front of the store entrance where it was well lit. The truck drove past slowly, and I got a glimpse of the driver staring at us as he passed. Then he accelerated and disappeared down the highway. My hands were shaking. "Do you think he was following us?" Melissa nodded grimly. "Probably. I've seen it before. They look for women broken down on the highway." Inside the gas station, the attendant let me use their phone to call a tow company, but they couldn't send anyone until morning. Melissa offered to take me all the way to Prince George, saying she didn't feel right leaving me there. I accepted gratefully. As we continued our journey, Melissa told me she'd been doing this for years, stopping to help Indigenous women stranded on Highway 16. She had a cousin who disappeared on that road in the 90s. Her body was found months later. The case was never solved. "Most people around here know someone who vanished," she said quietly. "The police don't do enough, so we look out for each other." We made it to Prince George around 1 in the morning. Melissa refused to leave until she saw me safely inside my apartment building. Before she left, she wrote down her number and made me promise to text her when I got my car back. The next day, when the tow truck driver reached my car, he called to tell me it had been broken into. The driver's side window was smashed. Nothing was taken. I hadn't left anything valuable inside, but there was mud all over the seats, like someone with dirty boots had been sitting in there. The mechanic later told me that my brake line had been cut, not completely through, but enough that it would have eventually failed if I'd kept driving. He said it looked deliberate, not like normal wear and tear. I filed a police report, but they just took my statement and said they'd look into it. I never heard back from them. It's been 6 months now. I still think about that night, about what might have happened if Melissa hadn't come along when she did. I think about that man in the truck, waiting down the road for me, doubling back when he saw I'd gotten a ride. I think about all those women who vanished on that same stretch of highway. When I told my grandmother what happened, she just nodded like she wasn't surprised at all. The highway has always been hungry, she said. Some men know it's the perfect hunting ground. I don't drive that highway alone anymore. None of my friends do either. We caravan when we need to travel, or we find other routes, even if they take longer. Some dangers you don't challenge twice. I still have nightmares about those headlights behind us in the darkness. About what might have happened if I'd accepted that first ride offer. About the women who did. The highway of tears earned its name, and its hunger isn't satisfied yet. Story 9. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened to me last July. Every time I think about it, my hand starts throbbing where the stitches were, like some phantom reminder. I've never been the type to scare easily. Growing up without parents kind of forces you to toughen up, but this experience shook me to my core. For context, I'm 24 and have been taking care of my little sister Carla since our parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. She's only 8, and between her school, activities, and just trying to give her some semblance of a normal childhood, money's always tight. I work at Gino's Pizza in Oak Ridge, small town, everybody knows everybody type of place, doing deliveries 5 nights a week. It's not glamorous, but the tips are decent, and the flexible hours let me be there when Carla gets home from school. Last Friday night started like any other shift. It was crazy humid, one of those July evenings where your shirt sticks to your back the minute you step outside. Around 9 o'clock, I got an order for 2 large pepperoni pizzas and chicken wings to the old Maple Street neighborhood. If you're not from around here, Maple Street is this older residential area with huge oak trees that block most of the street lights. The houses are nice but dated, lots of them from the 70s. I pulled up to the address, 1842 Maple, and immediately felt something was off. The entire house was dark except for this one porch light that kept flickering on and off, like the bulb was about to die. No other lights inside, no cars in the driveway. I figured maybe they were watching a movie or something. I grabbed the pizza warmer and the wings and walked up to the door. The concrete steps had these weird cracks with weeds growing through them, and the yard looked like it hadn't been mowed in weeks. I rang the doorbell, but it didn't make any sound, so I knocked. After about 30 seconds, I heard movement inside, slow footsteps. Then the door opened, just a crack, maybe 6 inches. There was this tall, skinny dude in a gray hoodie. The porch light was behind me, so I couldn't see his face clearly, just that he had this patchy stubble and these eyes that looked exhausted, hollow. I don't know how to describe it right, but they gave me goosebumps. 2 large pepperonis and wings? That'll be $27.50, I said. He didn't say a word, just reached his hand through the crack in the door and handed me exact change. No tip. Then his hand disappeared and reappeared, reaching for the food. I gave him the boxes and the door immediately closed. I heard the chain lock slide into place. It was weird, but not the weirdest delivery I'd ever had. People can be socially awkward, especially in this town. I shrugged it off and headed back to work. The next night, Saturday, I got the exact same order to the exact same address around 9:30. 2 pepperonis, wings, 1842 Maple. I remember thinking it was a bit odd to order the same thing 2 nights in a row, but whatever. People have their routines. This time the house seemed even darker. The porch light was completely off, but I could see the faint blue glow of a TV through the front window blinds. I knocked, and again the door opened just a crack. Same guy, same gray hoodie. He still didn't speak, just handed me exact change again and took the food. The door closed before I could even say thanks. As I was walking back to my car, I swear I saw the blinds move in the front window, like someone was watching me leave. It gave me this cold feeling in my stomach. That night after my shift, I picked up Carla from our neighbor Mrs. Peterson's house. She watches Carla when I work late. On the drive home, I kept checking my rearview mirror because I had this feeling someone was following us. I didn't see anything unusual, just headlights that eventually turned down a different street. Sunday was my day off. Carla and I went to the park, and while she was on the swings, I noticed someone sitting on a bench across the playground. Gray hoodie, hunched posture. When I looked directly at him, he got up and walked away. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Later that day, Carla and I were waiting at the bus stop to go to the grocery store, and I saw him again, or someone who looked just like him, across the street, leaning against a lamppost. When our eyes met, he turned and walked around the corner. By Monday, I was seriously on edge. I considered calling in sick to work, but we needed the money. My shift started at 5, and everything was normal until about 8:30, when another order came in for 1842 Maple. Exact same order, 2 pepperonis, wings. My manager, Tony, handed me the ticket and said, "Hey, isn't this the same order from the weekend?" I nodded, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Yeah, same guy ordered the same thing Friday and Saturday. Must really like our pizza." Tony laughed. I forced a smile and took the order. The whole drive. There, my hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that it was just some socially awkward dude who really liked pepperoni pizza. When I pulled up to the house this time, it was completely dark. No porch light, no TV glow, nothing. The place looked abandoned. I sat in my car for a minute debating whether to call Tony and tell him I couldn't deliver it. But I needed this job, and how would I explain my sudden fear of a regular customer? I grabbed the food and approached the door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I knocked once, then again harder. No answer, no footsteps inside. I was about to turn around and head back to my car when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. I spun around, nearly dropping the pizzas. There he was, the hooded man, standing at the bottom of the porch steps. He wasn't coming from the house, he was coming from somewhere else. The streetlight caught just enough of his face for me to see those hollow eyes and unshaven cheeks. He was close enough that I could smell stale cigarette smoke and something sour on his breath. "You're alone, aren't you?" he said in this raspy voice that made my skin crawl. Before I could respond, he pulled something from his pocket, a small knife with a curved blade. The metal glinted in the dim light. "Put the food down and give me your wallet and phone," he said, taking a step closer. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped everything. I set the pizzas and wings on the porch and reached for my wallet. "I only have like $30 on me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't care. Give it to me." He moved closer, knife pointed at my chest. I handed him my wallet, and as he grabbed it, I saw a tattoo on his wrist, some kind of symbol I couldn't make out. When I gave him my phone, his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. The knife slashed across my palm before I could pull away. I yelled and stumbled backward, blood immediately, soaking my hand. It burned like hell, and I could see it was a deep cut. "That's so you remember," he said, and then he was gone, disappearing between the houses across the street. I ran to my car, wrapped my hand in a napkin from the glove compartment, and called the police with the car's Bluetooth. They arrived in about 10 minutes, but by then there was no sign of the guy. The cops took my statement and then told me something that made my blood run cold. The house at 1842 Maple had been abandoned for months. The previous owners had moved out in February, and it was tied up in some kind of estate dispute. Nobody had lived there since. I ended up needing 12 stitches in my palm. The physical wound healed within a couple of weeks, but the psychological impact was much worse. I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the locks on our doors and windows. I installed a security system I couldn't really afford. I took a different route home every day, constantly checking to see if I was being followed. The police eventually figured out that the guy had been calling in the orders from a burner phone. They think he'd been watching me for days, maybe weeks, learning my routine. He knew I delivered alone, knew the layout of that neighborhood with its dark streets and abandoned houses. The scariest part wasn't the knife or the cut or even losing my wallet. It was realizing that this wasn't random. He picked me specifically. He watched me. He planned it. He ordered the same exact thing 3 times to establish a pattern, to make me comfortable going to that address. He studied me enough to know when I'd be vulnerable. I quit Gino's the next day, found a day job at a warehouse where I'm never alone. I moved Carla and me to a different apartment in a more populated area with better security. I still check my rearview mirror constantly and get nervous when I see anyone in a gray hoodie. The police never caught him. They said without better camera footage or witnesses, there wasn't much to go on. Just another robbery in their files. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, watching someone else, learning their patterns, waiting for the right moment. I wonder if he picked me randomly or if there was some reason. I'll never know. What haunts me most isn't what happened, it's what could have happened. What if I had brought Carla with me that night, like I sometimes did when Mrs. Peterson couldn't watch her? What if he had followed me home instead of confronting me at the house? I still have the scar on my palm. Sometimes when I'm driving at night and see someone standing alone at a bus stop or walking down a dark street, I feel this urge to warn them. Be careful who's watching you. Danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it looks like an ordinary house with an ordinary order on an ordinary night. And sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens to you, it's realizing how carefully it was planned. Story 10. I never thought I'd be writing this out, but I need to get it off my chest. Something happened at my home in Mapleton last week that still got me shaken up, and I can't stop thinking about it. Some background: I did 13 years in federal prison, not for murder or anything violent, securities fraud and some other white-collar stuff I'm not proud of. I've been out for almost 3 years now. When you've got that kind of record, finding work isn't easy, but I got lucky with this security company that specifically hires ex-cons. The pay isn't great, but it's honest work, and that's what matters to me now. I've been rebuilding my life piece by piece. My ex-wife remarried while I was inside, but we're on decent terms, and my 2 daughters, Emma, 16, and Lily, 14, stay with me every other weekend and 2 weeks during summer. I bought this little house on the outskirts of Mapleton. It's nothing fancy, just a small 3-bedroom on about half an acre, but it's mine. My slice of normal. That normalcy started unraveling about a month ago. It started with a note in the mailbox. Just one word: murderer, in big block letters on plain white paper. I stared at it for a long time, confused and angry. I've done things I regret, but I've never hurt anyone physically. I never murdered anybody. I threw it away and didn't mention it to the girls when they came over that weekend. The following week, there was another incident. My girlfriend, Tara, found a note under her windshield wiper when she was leaving for work. "Don't let him fool you," it said. What freaked us out was the old photograph of me that was paper clipped to it, a mugshot from my arrest 13 years ago. That photo would have been hard to find. It wasn't something you could just Google. The incidents escalated from there. The garden gnome my daughters had given me as a joke housewarming gift was found decapitated on the front porch with "Watch Your Back" spray painted across its body. Another time I woke up to find hundreds of plastic forks stuck in my lawn. Stupid teenage stuff, but it was targeted, persistent. What pushed me over the edge was what happened last Saturday. Emma and Lily were staying with me. We were having breakfast when Emma looked out the kitchen window and went completely pale. "Dad," she whispered, "there's something on the tree." I went outside and found a crude doll hanging from a branch by a piece of twine. It had a photo of my face taped to its head. Written across the photo in red marker, "Your daughters are next." That was it. I'd been patient, thinking it was just some neighborhood punks messing with the ex-con. But threatening my kids? No way. I called a buddy who works at a security company and had cameras installed that same day. 4 of them, covering every angle of my property. I didn't tell the girls exactly what was happening, just that we were having some issues with vandalism. I could see the fear in their eyes, though. They knew something was wrong. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then Wednesday night, around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. Someone was on my property. I checked the live feed and saw a figure moving across my front yard. Male, looked young, maybe late teens. He was wearing a dark hoodie, but he wasn't being careful about hiding his face. In fact, he seemed almost cocky. looking directly at one of the cameras at one point. That's when I recognized him. The kid lived about half a mile down the road with his parents, the Millers. They'd moved to the area about 4 months ago. I'd seen them at the local grocery store a few times, exchanged polite nods. Normal people, from what I could tell. I watched as the kid scattered something across my front porch, what looked like small animal bones. Then he pulled out a can of spray paint and wrote something on my front door. I couldn't read it from the camera angle, but I'd had enough. I didn't call the cops. With my record, interactions with police never go well, even when I'm the victim. Instead, I decided to handle this myself, not violently, but directly. The next morning, after checking that the kid's car was in their driveway, I drove over to the Miller's house. Mr. Miller answered the door. He was wearing khakis and a button-up shirt, like he'd just gotten home from work. He looked confused to see me standing there. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I need to talk to you and your son," I said. "It's important." His wife appeared behind him, and they exchanged a look before reluctantly inviting me in. Their living room was tidy and normal, family photos on the walls, a stack of magazines on the coffee table. They called their son, Tyler, down from upstairs. When he saw me, the blood drained from his face. He knew exactly who I was and why I was there. "What's this about?" Mr. Miller asked, his tone getting defensive. I kept my voice calm and steady. "Your son has been harassing my family for the past month, leaving threatening notes, vandalizing my property, and most recently, threatening my daughters." "That's ridiculous," Mrs. Miller said immediately. "Tyler wouldn't do that." The boy himself said nothing, just stared at the floor. "I installed security cameras last weekend," I said, pulling out my phone. "I have clear footage of Tyler on my property at 2 this morning. I showed them the video. The mother's hand went to her mouth. The father's face hardened, but I could see the shock in his eyes. Tyler started trembling. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Mr. Miller said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "It's not a mistake. I've got footage of him vandalizing my property, leaving what looked like animal bones on my porch and spray painting my door. The message, by the way, was 'dead man walking.'" Tyler's father turned to him. "Is this true?" The kid looked like he might throw up. "It was just supposed to be a joke," he mumbled. "A joke?" I felt my temper rising but fought to keep it under control. "You've been terrorizing my family for weeks. You threatened my daughters. How is any of that a joke?" "Tyler, why would you do something like this?" his mother asked, her voice breaking. The kid squirmed, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Me and some friends, we were making content, for views." "Content?" I repeated. "What are you talking about?" "For YouTube or TikTok. Real crime stuff. It gets tons of views." He still wouldn't look at me. I didn't buy it for a second. This wasn't about making videos. The notes were too personal, the escalation too targeted. He had researched me, found my mugshot, knew about my past. "I don't believe you," I said flatly. "But honestly, I don't care why you did it. What matters is that it stops, now." Mr. Miller stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between me and his son. "Look, I'm sorry about what Tyler's done. We'll make sure it never happens again." "That's not enough," I said. "I have 2 options here. I can call the police and press charges for harassment, vandalism, trespassing, mail tampering, and making threats, all of which would show up on the security footage. Or Tyler can pay for the damages and stay the hell away from my family." "He's just a kid," Mrs. Miller pleaded. "He made a mistake." "I made mistakes too," I said quietly. "And I paid for them. 13 years of my life. I'm trying to rebuild, to be there for my daughters. Your son has been systematically trying to destroy that." "How much for the damages?" Mr. Miller asked, reaching for his wallet. "It's not about money," I said. "The cameras cost me $800. The door will need to be repainted. The garden gnome was a gift from my daughters. But what I really want is for him to understand the consequences of his actions." Tyler's father tried to negotiate. "Look, we can pay for everything, and Tyler will apologize. Can't we just handle this between us? No need to involve authorities." I looked directly at Tyler, who was still staring at the floor. "I'm already handling this without authorities. That's me giving you a second chance. I believe in second chances. I needed one myself, but this is it. If anything else happens, anything at all, I'm going straight to the police with all the evidence I've collected." Tyler finally looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "It won't happen again." "It better not," I said, "because next time I won't be so understanding." Mr. Miller wrote me a check for $1,000 on the spot. As I was leaving, he followed me out to my car. "He's really not a bad kid," he said. "I don't know what got into him." "Maybe you should find out," I suggested, "because targeting an ex-con and his family isn't normal teenage rebellion. There's something else going on there." I drove home feeling hollow. The situation was resolved, but I couldn't shake the unease. Why had this kid fixated on me? Was it just because of my record, or was there something more personal? And who were these friends he mentioned? When I got home, I stood in my driveway for a long time, looking at my little house. I'd worked so hard to build something stable, something my daughters could feel safe in. It shouldn't be this fragile. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the mess on my porch and repainting my door. As I worked, I kept glancing up and down the street, half expecting to see Tyler or some other faceless threat watching me. The security cameras recorded everything, their little red lights blinking like eyes in the growing darkness. That night, I barely slept. Every creak and whisper of wind had me reaching for my phone to check the security feeds. Around 4 in the morning, I thought I heard footsteps on the porch, but the cameras showed nothing. The next day, I went to work as usual, checking my phone compulsively between shifts. Nothing unusual happened. Days passed, a week. The harassment seemed to have stopped, but something still feels wrong. Last night, I woke up at 3 in the morning with the absolute certainty that someone was in my house. I grabbed the baseball bat I've started keeping beside my bed and checked every room, every closet. Nothing. The security system showed no breaches, all doors and windows locked tight. As I was heading back to bed, I noticed something on my kitchen table that made my blood run cold. A small piece of white paper folded in half. I don't remember it being there when I went to bed. Inside was a message in the same block letters: "We're still watching." I checked the cameras again. Nothing. No one had entered my house, but the note was there, undeniably real in my trembling hands. I don't know what to do now. The police? With my record, they might not take me seriously. Move? I can't afford it, and I need to be near my daughters. All I know is that something isn't right. The confrontation with Tyler and his parents felt too easy, his explanation too flimsy. Whatever's happening, I don't think it's over, and I'm afraid of what comes next. Story 11. I still wake up in cold sweats some nights thinking about that evening on Highway 41. I know what I saw and I know what happened, even if nobody believes me, even if I can barely believe it myself. It was December 7th, 2003. I remember because it was close enough to Christmas that I was supposed to be looking at presents for my kids that weekend instead of pulling an extra shift. The department was short-staffed, and being the newest deputy in the county, I got stuck with the night patrol nobody wanted. My partner, James Forrester, had volunteered to come with me even though it wasn't his shift. That was James for you, always looking out for the new guys. We'd been driving for about 3 hours along Highway 41, that stretch of road that cuts through nothing but dense Georgia woods for miles. It was getting dark early, like it does in December, and a light fog was rolling in. James was telling me about the fishing trip he was planning with his son for the spring when we spotted it. A blue Honda Civic pulled over on the shoulder, hazards blinking weakly. "Let's check it out," James said, already reaching for his flashlight. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual about an abandoned car on a highway. I pulled our cruiser up behind it and ran the plates while James got out to take a closer look. The car came back registered to a Brandon Keller, 27, from Atlanta. I radioed in to dispatch to see if there were any reports on the vehicle. "That's weird," the dispatcher said after a minute. "That vehicle belongs to a missing person. Guy was reported missing 3 days ago by his work when he didn't show up for meetings," I told James, who was already peering into the windows of the Civic. "Car's clean," he called back. "No signs of struggle. Keys are still in the ignition." He opened the driver's door. It wasn't locked, which struck me as odd for a car abandoned on a highway. I joined him as he rummaged through the glove box, finding the registration and insurance papers all in order. There was a phone charger plugged in, a half-empty water bottle in the cup holder, and a briefcase in the back seat with pharmaceutical samples. Everything looked normal except for the GPS unit mounted on the dashboard. "Look at this," James said, turning it on. The screen lit up, showing a destination somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Just coordinates, no actual location name. Why would he program coordinates for the middle of the ocean? I wondered out loud. James shrugged. Maybe it glitched. He reached under the seat and pulled out a road atlas. According to his work schedule found in the briefcase, he should have been heading to Macon for a meeting. This is a good 90 miles out of his way. We both looked around at the empty highway, stretching in both directions, and then at the dense woods beyond the shoulder. The fog was getting thicker, turning the beams from our flashlights into solid cones of light. "I'm going to check the tree line," James said. "Maybe he went to take a leak and got turned around or something." "I'll call this in and request backup," I said, not liking the feel of the situation. James nodded and headed toward the woods while I went back to the cruiser to radio dispatch. I remember watching him walk away, his flashlight beam bouncing as he moved. Just another routine check, nothing to worry about. I called in our location and the situation with the abandoned vehicle. Dispatch said they'd send another unit our way, but it would take at least 40 minutes given our remote location. That's when I heard James call out from the edge of the woods, "Hey, I think I see something. There's a path here." I grabbed my flashlight and was about to join him when I noticed something odd about the road. It was perfect, not a single pothole or crack in the asphalt. For a rural Georgia highway, that was practically unheard of. "James, wait up," I called, jogging toward where I'd seen his flashlight beam disappear into the trees. I reached the spot where he'd entered the woods and found a narrow dirt path leading deeper into the forest. His flashlight beam was visible about 50 yards ahead, bobbing between the trees. "James," I called again, but he didn't respond. I followed the path, my boots crunching on dead leaves and twigs. The fog was even thicker in the woods, and the trees seemed to swallow the sound. I called James's name a few more times, but the only response was the echo of my own voice. After about 5 minutes of walking, the path widened into a small clearing. James's flashlight lay on the ground, still on, the beam pointing into empty space. There was no sign of him. "James?" I tried again, my voice sounding small and hollow in the clearing. "James, this isn't funny, man." That's when I noticed the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant highway sounds. Nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing and the pounding of my heart. I keyed my radio to call for immediate backup, but all I got was static. I tried again, adjusting the frequency, but nothing worked. I was completely cut off. I picked up James's flashlight and swept it around the clearing. The beam caught something reflective at the edge, a small metal marker embedded in a tree, like a survey marker but with no writing, just a strange symbol etched into it that looked like a series of concentric circles. As I approached to examine it closer, I heard a sound behind me, footsteps on the path. I whirled around, relief flooding through me. "James?" But the path was empty, yet I could still hear footsteps getting closer. I drew my weapon, my hands shaking slightly. "Sheriff's Department, identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. Then, from somewhere to my left, I heard them again. I turned, but again saw nothing. The footsteps seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. That's when my radio crackled to life with James's voice, but it was distorted, like he was speaking from underwater. "There's someone walking back from the trees. They don't... Wait, that's not possible." Then silence. "James!" I shouted into the radio. "James, where are you?" No response, just static. The fog in the clearing started to move in a way fog shouldn't, swirling in a circular pattern like water going down a drain. And in the center of this swirl, the air seemed to bend like looking through warped glass. I backed away, my training completely forgotten in the face of whatever was happening. That's when I felt something touch my shoulder from behind. I spun around, nearly dropping my weapon, but there was nothing there. Just empty air and silent trees. A low humming sound began to fill the clearing, vibrating through my bones. The hair on my arms stood up as static electricity charged the air. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness except for the faint glow coming from the center of the fog swirl. In that moment, I knew I needed to get out of there. I turned and ran back down the path toward the highway, not looking back, praying I was going the right way in the darkness. I burst out of the woods and onto the highway, nearly collapsing with relief at the sight of our cruiser's flashing lights. I sprinted to the car, fumbling with the radio as soon as I got in. "Officer down! Officer down!" I shouted into the handset. "Deputy Forrester is missing in the woods off Highway 41, mile marker 17. I need all available units." Within an hour, the area was crawling with law enforcement, state police, county deputies, search and rescue teams with dogs. We searched those woods all night and for weeks afterward. 15 square miles of forest combed by hundreds of officers and volunteers. We never found James. Not a trace. No footprints, no equipment, nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. The investigation turned up things that still give me nightmares. 4 other people had disappeared along that same stretch of highway over the years, all leaving behind abandoned vehicles. The GPS in Keller's car wasn't malfunctioning. He had deliberately programmed those coordinates in the Atlantic Ocean. Department of Transportation records showed no maintenance had been done on that section of highway for 15 years, despite its perfect condition. Locals reported seeing unmarked government vehicles in the area in the weeks before James disappeared. And then there was the report I wasn't supposed to see, about a federal task force that had been monitoring electromagnetic anomalies occurring in 7-year cycles at that exact location. The report mentioned temporal instabilities and dimensional variances, terms that meant nothing to me but apparently meant something to someone important enough to classify the document. 3 years later, they enhanced the audio from James's final transmission. Those weren't his exact words. What he actually said was, "There's someone walking back from the trees. They don't... Wait, that's not me." After 3 more disappearances in 2010, they installed cameras along that stretch of highway. They experience unexplained power failures every 7 years. We call it Nowhere Road now. No one in the department will take assignments there after dark. Some refuse to go there at all. I quit the force 6 months after James disappeared. Couldn't handle it anymore. I moved 2 counties over, tried to put it behind me. But every December 7th, I drive out to that spot on Highway 41 and park where we found Keller's Honda. I sit there until dawn, watching the woods, waiting. For what, I don't know. Last year, on the 14th anniversary, I saw something. A flashlight beam, deep in the woods, called out James's name, but no one answered. As I watched, the light slowly faded away. The locals have theories, government experiments, alien abductions, tears in reality. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that something took my partner that night, something I can't explain. And sometimes, in my dreams, I hear footsteps coming closer, and I know they're coming for me next. I'm writing this down because the 7-year cycle is almost complete again. December 7th is next week. I won't be going to the highway this time, but I keep seeing that symbol from the tree marker everywhere, in cloud formations, in the pattern of cracks on my driveway, in the arrangement of stars at night. I think whatever took James is calling me back. And God help me, I'm afraid I'll answer. Story 12. I've been sitting on this experience for 10 years now. I've told almost no one. My therapist thinks it's PTSD from hypothermia or carbon monoxide poisoning from our camp stove. My parents think I had a bad reaction to altitude and cold. But Caleb is still missing, and the three of us who made it out, we're not the same. This happened back in January 2013. I'm Rachel Donovan. I was 27 then, working as an environmental scientist in Albany. I'd been backcountry skiing and winter camping for almost a decade by that point. This wasn't my first rodeo. The four of us, me, Thomas Reed, Mark Shepard, and Caleb Winters, we were all experienced outdoors people. We'd done several winter expeditions together before. We weren't amateurs who went out unprepared. We had planned this Adirondack trip for months. The route was challenging but nothing extreme. A 3-day loop through some of the high peaks, staying below the alpine zone. We checked avalanche forecasts, weather reports, trail conditions. Thomas was almost obsessive about preparation. He had topographic maps, compass bearings marked out, GPS, coordinates for emergency exits. We even filed our trip plan with the park rangers. We left early Friday morning. I remember being excited, that feeling you get when you're escaping civilization for a while. The forecast called for temperatures around 15 degrees Fahrenheit at night, cold but manageable with our gear. The first day went perfectly. The trails were well packed, and we made good time. The forest was that winter quiet that I love, just the swoosh of our skis and our breathing. We reached our planned campsite around 4 in the afternoon. It was this beautiful clearing surrounded by these massive white pines, the kind that have stood for maybe 100 years. I remember looking up at them against the fading blue sky and feeling so small. While setting up camp, Thomas mentioned smelling something metallic. At first I didn't notice it, but after he pointed it out, I caught whiffs of it too. Like the smell of pennies or blood, but faint. Mark suggested it might be some mineral in the soil or water. We didn't think much of it, honestly. We were more concerned about the temperature, which was dropping faster than forecast. We cooked dinner on our camp stoves, had some whiskey that Caleb brought, he always had the good stuff, and turned in around 9. The temperature had already fallen below 0. I remember checking my watch before zipping up my sleeping bag. It was 9:23. I woke up suddenly. My watch said 2:07. At first I thought I needed to pee, but then I felt it, this weird vibration coming through the ground, not like an earthquake, more like when you stand near heavy machinery, but deeper somehow. And there was this blue light filtering through my tent walls, pulsing slowly, maybe once every 2 seconds. My first thought was that someone had found our campsite and was messing with us. I called out to Mark, who was in my tent. He was already awake, staring at the tent wall where the light was strongest. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. We unzipped the tent and looked out. The light was coming from deeper in the forest, maybe 50 yards away. It was blue-white, like really intense moonlight, but pulsing, and it was illuminating the trees from below, casting these weird, moving shadows. I called out to Thomas and Caleb in the other tent. They joined us, and we all just stood there watching. The humming was louder outside, vibrating in my chest like standing in front of a massive speaker. "We should check it out," Caleb said, already pulling on his boots. "I don't know," Thomas replied. "Maybe we should stay put." But curiosity won. We grabbed our headlamps and started walking toward the light, crunching through the snow. And that's when I noticed the silence. Complete, absolute silence. No wind in the trees, no distant owl calls, nothing. Just that humming. As we got closer, I noticed the snow around the light source was melting in a perfect circle. The temperature had to be at least 20 below 0 by then, but the snow was turning to slush and disappearing. Within the circle, the ground was completely bare. We stopped at the edge of the trees, maybe 20 feet from the perimeter of the melted area. The light was coming from everywhere and nowhere within that circle. There was no clear source, just this pulsing blue-white illumination that seemed to hover about 3 feet above the ground. "Look at the trees," Mark whispered. The pines within the circle were, vibrating isn't the right word, shimmering maybe, like they were slightly out of phase with reality. I've never seen anything like it before or since. We watched for what Thomas later said was about 20 minutes. No one wanted to get any closer. Then suddenly, the light intensified. It went from bright to blinding in an instant. I covered my eyes, but the light seemed to penetrate right through my hands. There was a sound like air being sucked out of the space around us, and then, nothing. The light vanished, the humming stopped, and the forest erupted with sound. Branches creaking, an owl hooting, the wind suddenly whipping through the trees like it had been held back and finally released. We all stumbled backward, disoriented. "What the actual fuck was that?" Caleb said, his voice shaking. None of us had an answer. We were all breathing hard, adrenaline pumping. We decided to go back to our tents and wait until daylight to investigate further. I don't think any of us slept the rest of the night. I just lay there, listening to Mark's breathing, watching the normal darkness for any hint of that blue glow. When dawn finally came, we emerged from our tents. The metallic smell was gone, replaced by the normal scent of pine and snow. We ate a quick breakfast in silence, then grabbed our gear to check out the spot from the night before. What we found still haunts me. The perfect circle of bare ground was still there, about 30 feet across. But the trees, those massive century-old white pines that had been inside the circle, they were gone. Not cut down, not burned, just absent. No stumps, no roots, nothing to indicate they had ever been there. The ground was perfectly smooth and unnaturally warm to the touch. Steam was rising from it in the cold morning air. "This isn't possible," Thomas kept saying, walking around the perimeter of the circle. "Trees don't just disappear." In the center of the circle, we found Thomas's topographic map, the one he'd carefully marked with our route. It had been in his pack the night before. We all saw him put it there after dinner. Now it was laid out flat in the middle of this impossible circle, and it was marked with strange symbols drawn in what looked like red clay. Geometric patterns, triangles, circles, and lines arranged in configurations that somehow hurt to look at directly. "I didn't do this," Thomas said when we all turned to him. "I swear to God I didn't do this." I believed him. We all did. That's when Caleb noticed the first nosebleed. Then Thomas wiped his nose, and his hand came away bloody too. Within minutes, all four of us had blood dripping from our noses and pounding headaches that felt like ice picks behind our eyes. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, and no one argued. We packed up camp in record time. Thomas tried to use his compass to confirm our route back, but the needle just spun wildly. My GPS showed coordinates that made no sense. It claimed we were somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. All our electronics were glitching, watches showing impossible times, my camera turning on and off by itself. We had to navigate by the sun and our knowledge of the terrain. The headaches got worse as we skied. I remember feeling like my skull was in a vice. We didn't talk much, just pushed on toward the trailhead where we'd left our cars. When we finally reached the parking lot, something was wrong. There were different cars than when we'd arrived. Our vehicles were still there, but they were covered in more snow than made sense for a 2-day trip. Thomas checked his phone, which was working again. "It's Monday," he said, his voice hollow. "January 21st. That was impossible. We'd left on Friday morning, January 18th. We'd spent one night camping. It should have been Saturday. "We lost a day," Caleb said, looking at each of us. "What happened on Saturday? What did we do for an entire day?" None of us had an answer. There was just nothing. A complete blank between watching that light disappear and waking up the next morning. 24 hours, gone. We drove back to Albany in a daze. I remember the four of us sitting in a diner just outside the park, trying to make sense of what happened. The nosebleeds had stopped, but the headaches lingered. We agreed to tell no one. Who would believe us anyway? But things only got stranger in the weeks that followed. I couldn't sleep. When I did, I had nightmares filled with those same geometric patterns from the map. I'd wake up sweating, certain that something was in my bedroom, watching me. Then the burns started appearing, small circular marks on my arms and back that would appear overnight and then fade within hours. Thomas and Mark reported the same thing when we finally broke down and called each other. Caleb took it the hardest. He became obsessed with finding an explanation. He researched everything from ball lightning to government experiments. 6 months after our trip, he told me he was going back to the site alone to find answers. That was the last time I spoke to him. His car was found at the same trailhead we'd used. Search and rescue combed the area for weeks. All they ever found was a single boot print in the mud, mid-stride, as if he'd taken a step and simply vanished mid-air. Thomas, Mark, and I have barely spoken since then. What happened out there broke something between us. Thomas called me once, drunk, about a year after Caleb disappeared. He said we'd encountered something that exists in the margins between known reality and something else entirely. Then he hung up. Sometimes I still catch whiffs of that metallic smell. Sometimes I wake up at 2:07 exactly, feeling that vibration in my chest. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still see that blue light pulsing behind my eyelids. I don't go into the backcountry anymore. I can't. Whatever happened in those woods is still with me, still unexplained, and I'm terrified that someday, like Caleb, I might just disappear. Story 13. I still can't sleep when it rains hard at night. It's been 7 years now, and my heart still races when I hear those heavy droplets hitting my window. I've moved 3 times since then, but I swear I still check my locks twice on rainy nights. I've never told this story outside of therapy, and my therapist probably thinks I was just high and paranoid. But Ari was there too, and to this day, she refuses to go out when it's pouring. So I know what we saw was real. I was 15, and it was summer vacation in Pinewood Heights, where I grew up. It was one of those boring suburban towns where nothing ever happens, and kids like me and my best friend Ari would do anything to fight the boredom. We were both really into skateboarding back then. I wasn't particularly good at it, but Ari was pretty talented. She could do all these tricks I could barely attempt without falling on my ass. That night, it was pouring rain, like absolutely dumping. The kind of summer storm that makes the streets shine like black mirrors and creates that constant white noise that drowns out everything else. Most of our friends had bailed on hanging out because of the weather, but Ari and I were bored out of our minds at home. We'd been cooped up for days because of the rain, and we just needed to get out. So I texted her, "Want to smoke at the courts? In this rain? You crazy?" She replied, "The handball court has that tree over it. We won't get soaked." 20 minutes later, we met up at the corner of my street. We were both already drenched, despite our hoodies. Ari was 14 then, a year younger than me, but she always seemed older somehow. Maybe because she was taller or just more confident. She had her skateboard tucked under her arm, and I had mine, though we knew we wouldn't be riding in this weather. "This is so stupid," she laughed as we started walking toward my school, which was about a 15-minute walk from my house. "We're going to catch pneumonia or something." "Worth it," I said, patting my pocket where I had a joint and a lighter safely sealed in a Ziploc bag. We weren't exactly model students, I guess. The school was completely deserted at night, especially in this weather. Behind the main building were the basketball and handball courts where we often hung out on weekends or after hours. The handball court was partially sheltered by this massive oak tree that grew right next to it, with branches stretching over about half the court. It wasn't perfect cover, but it was enough to keep us mostly dry while we smoked. When we got there, the rain seemed to get even heavier. The sound was almost deafening, just this constant, overwhelming rush of water hitting concrete and leaves. The darkness made everything look different. The school I saw every day suddenly felt unfamiliar and strange. The only light came from a distant street lamp that cast weird, shifting shadows as the wind blew through the trees. We huddled under the tree, and I pulled out the joint and lighter. My hands were shaking a bit from the cold rain, but I managed to light it after a few tries. Ari connected her phone to this little Bluetooth speaker she always carried and put on some music, but kept it low. Even though the school was empty, we didn't want to attract any attention. It's weird how perception changes when you're high. The rain started to sound like whispers. The shadows seemed to move in ways they shouldn't. I remember staring at the raindrops, catching what little light there was and thinking they looked like falling stars. That's when I noticed him. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There's a row of benches at the far end of the basketball courts, maybe 50 yards from where we were sitting. And there was this figure sitting on one of them, a man, a huge man. I couldn't see his face clearly through the rain and darkness, but I could tell he was massive, tall and broad-shouldered. "Ari," I whispered, nudging her arm. "Look over there. Is that someone sitting on that bench?" She squinted through the rain. "Holy shit, I think it is." What made it so unsettling wasn't just that someone was out there in this weather, it was how he was sitting, completely still, perfectly upright. Not hunched against the rain or trying to stay dry, just sitting there facing directly toward us, not moving his head at all, just staring. "Maybe it's a homeless guy," Ari suggested, but her voice had that nervous edge to it. "In this rain? And why would he just be sitting there like that?" "I don't know. Maybe he's drunk or something." I tried to convince myself that's all it was, just some random drunk guy who had wandered onto the school property. But something felt off, deeply off. The way he sat was so unnatural, so deliberate. No one sits perfectly still in pouring rain unless they're waiting for something, or someone. "Let's just ignore him," Ari said, turning the music up slightly, as if to drown out my concerns. We tried to go back to our conversation, passing the joint back and forth, but I couldn't stop glancing over at the bench. The man hadn't moved an inch, not to wipe rain from his face, not to adjust his position. Nothing, just that rigid, statue-like stillness, with his gaze fixed exactly where we were sitting. After about 15 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. "Ari, I'm freaking out. He's still staring at us." This time, she didn't dismiss my concern. She looked again, longer this time, and I saw her face change. The carefree expression was gone, replaced by something I rarely saw on Ari: fear. "Okay, yeah, that's weird as fuck," she admitted. "Should we leave?" "I think so." We turned off the music and started gathering our things, trying to act casual. But there's no casual way to leave when you're being watched like that. My hands were shaking as I picked up my skateboard, and not from the cold anymore. We started walking toward the path that led down the hill to the park exit. I couldn't help looking back one more time. That's when it happened. The man stood up, but not like a normal person stands. It was this weird, rigid movement, like watching a mannequin being pulled upright by strings. His body unfolded to its full height, and he was even bigger than I'd thought, at least 6.5 feet tall, maybe more. Ari and I froze, watching him. For a moment, everything was still, just the sound of rain and our breathing. Then he moved. He didn't walk or jog. He exploded into a sprint, an unnaturally fast sprint, his long legs covering ground in massive strides, arms pumping with mechanical precision, and he was coming straight for us. "Run!" I screamed, although Ari was already moving. We both took off, our skateboards clutched to our chests. We'd planned to leave together, but instinct took over and we ended up running in different directions. I went left, toward the street that bordered the east side of the school, and Ari went right, toward the main entrance. I ran harder than I've ever run in my life. The rain whipped against my face, and my soaked clothes felt like they were made of lead. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, almost louder than the rain. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was too afraid of what I might see. I reached the street and kept running. The neighborhood was completely deserted. No cars, no people walking dogs, no one to call out to for help. Just empty, rain-slicked streets and the yellow glow of streetlights reflecting off puddles. After about 2 blocks, I finally risked a glance over my shoulder, and my blood turned to ice. He was there, maybe 100 yards behind me, but closing fast. His stride was impossibly long, eating up the distance between us with each step. His face was still a blur in the darkness and rain, but I could feel his eyes on me. Hungry eyes, predator eyes. I cut through someone's yard, jumped a fence, and crossed into another street. My lungs were burning, and my legs felt like they might give out at any moment, but pure terror kept me moving. When I looked back again, he wasn't behind me anymore. For a second I felt relief, then panic. Where was he? Had he given up, or had he changed direction? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Ari. "Hes chasing me now, help." My heart dropped. He must have seen her when we split up and decided to follow her instead. I texted back with shaking fingers. "Where are?" "Near highway overpass." I knew exactly where she meant. There's this overpass about half a mile from the school where the highway crosses over one of the main roads. It's well lit and usually has at least some traffic, even late at night. I changed direction and ran toward it, pushing through the burning in my muscles. I had to help Ari. I couldn't leave her alone with whatever that was. As I approached the overpass, I spotted Ari standing beneath it, sheltered from the rain, looking around frantically. I waved and called out to her, my voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain. When I reached her, we both collapsed against the concrete wall, gasping for breath. "Did you see him?" I panted. "Is he still following you?" "I don't know," she wheezed. "He was right behind me, like right fucking behind me." I could hear his feet splashing in the puddles, but when I got to the light, I looked back, and he was just gone. We stood there for what felt like hours, scanning the darkness beyond the pool of light cast by the overpass lamps. But there was nothing, no sign of the man who had chased us. Eventually, we called Ari's older brother, who drove us home. We told him we got caught in the rain while skateboarding and needed a ride, leaving out everything else. What would we even say? That we were being chased by some giant man who moved like a robot and disappeared into thin air. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what happened. We even went back to the school in daylight, half expecting to find some rational explanation. But there was nothing unusual about the bench or the basketball courts, just normal, everyday places that looked nothing like the nightmare landscape of that rainy night. We talked about telling our parents or the police, but what would we report? We were smoking weed where we shouldn't have been. And besides, what crime could we report? A man sat on a bench and then ran. It sounded stupid in the light of day, but at night, alone in my room, it didn't feel stupid at all. It felt terrifying, because I couldn't shake one question. How did he know we were there? It was pouring rain. The school was closed. There was no reason for anyone to be there, let alone sitting motionless on a bench in a downpour, staring directly at the spot where 2 teenage girls happened to be hiding, unless he was waiting for us, unless he knew we would be there. That thought still keeps me up at night. The idea that he wasn't just some random creep who spotted us by chance, but someone or something that had been watching us, learning our habits, knowing where we would go even on a night when nobody else would be out. Ari and I drifted apart after high school. She moved to another state for college, and we only talk occasionally now. But whenever we do, neither of us ever brings up that night. It's like an unspoken agreement to pretend it never happened. But it did happen. And sometimes, when the rain is heavy and the night is dark, I find myself looking out my window, scanning the shadows. Because deep down, I'm not convinced he gave up. I think he's still out there, waiting, watching. And someday, when I least expect it, I'll look up and see that rigid figure standing perfectly still, staring directly at me. And then he'll start running again. Story 14. I never wanted to be the person who exposed a monster. I never imagined I'd be at the center of a case that would change how small towns across America celebrate holidays. But here I am, 6 years later, still unable to shake what happened during what should have been just another small-town Easter egg hunt. I was the deputy sheriff in Millfield, Oregon, back in April of 2017. Our town is one of those places where everybody knows everybody, where people leave their doors unlocked, and where the annual Easter egg hunt at Sawyer Memorial Park was the highlight of spring for local families. I'd been working law enforcement in Millfield for 11 years by then, and the worst things I usually dealt with were drunk drivers and the occasional domestic dispute. That Easter Sunday started like any other. I remember the weather was unusually nice, sunny but not too hot, with those puffy white clouds that kids draw in pictures. My wife had made a big breakfast before church, and my 2 boys were hyped up on chocolate even before we got to the park. The Easter egg hunt was scheduled for 1 in the afternoon, right after most church services had ended. I wasn't on duty that day. I was just a dad, watching my kids run around with their baskets, hunting for those plastic eggs filled with candy and small toys. The park was packed. I'd guess about 300 people were there, maybe more. Kids in their Sunday best, parents with cameras, grandparents in lawn chairs watching from the sidelines. Sheriff Morgan, my boss, was there in uniform, but it was just for show. Nothing bad ever happened at the Easter egg hunt. Until it did. I first noticed something was wrong when I heard Sarah Layton calling for her daughter Lily. At first, it wasn't urgent, just a mom trying to round up her kid after the hunt. But after about 15 minutes, Sarah's voice changed. There was panic creeping in. I found myself scanning the crowds, looking for Lily's bright yellow dress and the pink basket I'd seen her carrying earlier. Other parents started helping look. Then Sheriff Morgan got involved, and suddenly it wasn't just a confused kid who'd wandered off. It was a missing child. Sheriff asked me to help even though I was off duty, and of course, I said yes. We organized the adults into search parties, checking the playground, the picnic areas, the bathrooms, the parking lot. Lily Layton was 8 years old, brown hair in pigtails, yellow dress, white tights, patent leather shoes. She was missing a front tooth and had been so excited about the Easter egg hunt that morning that she'd barely eaten breakfast, according to her mom. Everyone in town knew Lily. Her dad ran the hardware store downtown, and she was in the same class as my younger son. Within an hour, we'd called in all off-duty officers and contacted the state police. The thing that made it so disturbing was that Lily had vanished in broad daylight, surrounded by practically the whole town. How does that even happen? Some people thought maybe she'd gone home with another family by mistake, but Coles ruled that out quickly. We expanded the search beyond the park boundaries. I was with the team that found her basket about half a mile into the woods beyond where the egg hunt had been set up. It was just sitting there on the ground, still with a few candy-filled eggs inside. Nearby were footprints, clearly an adult's shoes, not a child's. That's when we knew for sure this wasn't just a lost kid. Someone had taken her. I've never seen Sheriff Morgan look so grim. He's normally this unflappable guy, but when he saw that little pink basket sitting in the dirt, something in his face changed. He called in the FBI, set up roadblocks, and started a door-to-door canvass of the entire town. Meanwhile, Sarah and Tom Layton were falling apart at the command center we'd set up in the park pavilion. The next 18 hours were a blur of search teams, K-9 units, interviews, and growing desperation. I don't think anyone in Millfield slept that night. I know I didn't. I kept thinking about my own kids, safe at home with my wife, while somewhere out there, Lily was with someone who'd taken her against her will. Around noon the next day, the call came in. It was routed through the station to Sheriff Morgan's cell phone. The caller didn't identify themselves, just a muffled voice telling us to check an abandoned hunting cabin about 6 miles north of town. Then they hung up. I was part of the team that went to that cabin. It was this dilapidated place back in the Woods, the kind teenagers use for parties sometimes, but what we found inside wasn't leftover beer cans and cigarette butts. There were plastic Easter eggs arranged in a perfect circle on the floor, different colors but arranged in a pattern. It was deliberate, ritualistic. It made my skin crawl, but that wasn't the worst of it. In a back room we found a metal box, like a footlocker padlocked shut. When we broke it open, there were items. A child's hairbrush with blonde hair still in it, a small teddy bear keychain, a girl's charm bracelet, a tiny pair of glasses, a handmade Valentine card signed Katie. There must have been 30 or 40 personal items, all small things a child might carry or wear. The dates on some of the items went back decades. The Valentine was dated 1989. I remember standing there looking at these objects and suddenly understanding we weren't dealing with an opportunistic kidnapping. This was someone who had been taking children for years. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I might throw up. One of the state police officers found the storm cellar. It was hidden under an old rug, the handle disguised to look like just another floorboard. When they pulled it open, the smell that came out was awful. Damp and musty and something worse. I wasn't the first one down those stairs, but I was close behind. And there she was, Lily, alive. She was huddled in a corner on a dirty mattress. She was still in her yellow dress, though it was filthy now. When the light hit her face, she didn't scream or cry. She just blinked like she couldn't process what was happening. I've never seen a child look so vacant. I stayed with her while the medics came, talked to her softly, told her she was safe now, that her mom and dad were waiting for her. She didn't say a word until they were loading her into the ambulance. Then she looked at me and said, "Is Mr. Ray coming back?" Mr. Ray, that was our first real lead. At the hospital, when Lily was feeling a bit safer, she told us that Mr. Ray was the one who'd taken her. She knew him from the park. He was the man who emptied the trash cans and cleaned the bathrooms. He'd told her there was a special golden egg hidden in the woods, one that would win her a big prize. But she needed to come right away and not tell anyone because it was supposed to be a surprise. It didn't take long to identify Raymond Mercer, 62, a seasonal employee with the Parks Department. He'd worked for the town for the past 3 Easter seasons, but only for a few weeks each spring. His background check had been clean. He lived alone in a small house on the edge of town. By the time we got to Mercer's house, he was gone. But what we found inside was enough to turn even the most hardened investigator's stomach. One entire wall of his living room was covered with children's drawings. They were all taped up neatly, each one dated and labeled with a name. The oldest ones were from 1985. Some were clearly Easter-themed, bunny rabbits and eggs. Others were just typical kid drawings, houses, families, pets. His workshop was the worst part. It was where he made Easter eggs, not the plastic kind, but elaborately decorated ones. Ceramic, wooden, even some that looked like real eggs that had been preserved somehow. They were beautiful, actually, which made it all the more disturbing. Each one had a child's name and a date painted on it in tiny, meticulous lettering. As we pieced together the evidence, we realized Mercer had been doing this for over 30 years. He'd move to a town, get a job with the local parks department or somewhere else that put him in contact with children, identify a victim, and then use the Easter egg hunt as his opportunity to take them. Sometimes he kept them for days, sometimes just hours. Lily was lucky. We found her quickly. Some of the others. The FBI took over the investigation after that. They traced Mercer's movements across 7 states, connecting him to at least 7 child disappearances since the mid-80s. Always around Easter. Always children between 7 and 10 years old. He was smart. He never stayed in one place long enough to raise suspicions, and he targeted communities where his quiet, helpful demeanor wouldn't stand out. They caught him trying to cross into Canada 3 days after we found Lily. He had a journal with him, detailing what he called his Easter tradition. Reading excerpts from that journal during his trial was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He wrote about the children like they were collectibles, special finds that he'd discovered and added to his eternal Easter family. The items in that metal box helped identify victims from cold cases going back decades. Some families finally got answers about children who'd disappeared 20 or 30 years ago. I'm not sure if that's better or worse than never knowing. At his trial, Mercer sat there calmly as the evidence mounted against him. When asked why he did it, he said something I'll never forget. Easter is about rebirth, about finding what's hidden. These children were special. They deserve to be part of my collection, my eternal Easter family. He'll die in prison. Multiple life sentences ensure that. But the damage he did goes beyond his victims and their families. In Millfield, we don't have Easter egg hunts in the park anymore. Parents don't let their kids out of sight at public events. The easy trust that made our town special is gone. Sometimes I drive by Sawyer Memorial Park and see how empty it is compared to before. I think about how one man poisoned not just our town, but towns across America where similar cases were connected to him. I think about how he hid in plain sight, using a position of trust to access victims. And I think about Lily. She's 14 now. She doesn't wear yellow anymore. She doesn't like Easter. And sometimes, when I see her around town, she still has that vacant look in her eyes, like part of her is still in that cellar, waiting for someone to find her. I check my kids' rooms at night now, every night, even though they're teenagers, even though Mercer is locked away forever. Because now I know that monsters are real, and sometimes they're the quiet man emptying the trash cans, smiling and waving as your children run past with their Easter baskets, hunting for eggs while being hunted themselves. Story 15. I'm still shaking as I type this. I need to get this off my chest because I can't talk to anyone else about it without sounding completely paranoid. But I know what happened that night, and I can't stop thinking about it. I've been driving for Go Car, not the real name, for about 2 years now. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills when my graphic design gigs are slow. I live in Lakeside County, which is mostly rural with a few small towns scattered throughout. Not exactly a hot spot for rideshare drivers, but there's enough business from people who need rides to the airport or college kids who've had too much to drink. 3 weeks ago, we had this massive storm system move through, the kind where the rain comes down in sheets and the wind bends trees sideways. Most drivers sign off when the weather gets bad. It's just not worth the risk for a few extra bucks. But I've always been stubborn about that. My dad was a trucker, and I guess I inherited his "the job's not done till it's done" mentality. Plus, surge pricing kicks in when other drivers bail. So there I was, parked at the 24-hour gas station on Miller Road around 11:30 at night, scrolling through my phone while raindrops hammered my windshield like tiny bullets. I hadn't had a ride request for almost an hour and was thinking about calling it quits when my phone pinged. The map showed a pickup point way out on County Road 17, basically the middle of nowhere. The pin was dropped at an intersection that didn't even have a street light, 25 minutes away. On a good day, I'd hesitate, but in this weather, I almost declined it. But something made me accept. Maybe it was the potential $30 fare, or maybe I just felt bad for whoever was stranded out there in this mess. Either way, I put the car in drive and headed out. The windshield wipers were on full blast, but still couldn't keep up with the downpour. The roads were starting to flood in places, and twice I had to slow to a crawl to get through particularly deep puddles. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the empty fields and dense tree lines on either side of the road. As I turned onto County Road 17, my headlights barely cut through the darkness. There were no houses out here, no businesses, just acres of farmland and patches of forest. My GPS announced I was approaching my destination, and I squinted through the rain-soaked windshield. Nothing, just an empty crossroads with a stop sign that was tilting dangerously in the wind. I pulled to a stop right where the pin had been dropped and messaged the passenger. "I'm here at the pickup location. Where are you exactly?" No response. I waited 5 minutes, which is longer than I usually give people, especially in weather like this. I was about to cancel the ride when I caught movement in my rearview mirror. I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a figure standing behind my car, completely drenched. How long had he been standing there? I hadn't seen anyone when I pulled up, and I definitely didn't see anyone approach the car. But there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a dark jacket with the hood pulled up. Before I could process this, he opened the back door and slid into the seat. Water cascaded off him onto my upholstery, but that wasn't what made my stomach clench. It was his face, what I could see of it in the dim light of the car. His expression was wrong, tight-lipped, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. Not the look of someone grateful to be rescued from a storm. "Hey, how's it going?" I said, trying to sound casual while my heart rate picked up. "You must be Thomas?" He didn't answer, just stared at me through the rearview mirror. I noticed he'd sat directly behind me, not on either side where passengers usually sit, and he wasn't wearing a seatbelt. I cleared my throat. "So, where we headed tonight?" I glanced at my phone. The destination was set for a place called Miners Ridge, about 40 minutes away. "That's right," he finally spoke, his voice low and rough. "Miners Ridge." I nodded and started driving, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck. Something felt off, but I couldn't just kick him out in the middle of nowhere in this storm. The roads got narrower as we drove, with fewer houses and more dense forest. The rain was still coming down hard, and several times I had to slow down when branches appeared in the road. "So what brings you out to such a remote spot on a night like this?" I asked, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. "Nothing. Just those eyes in my rear view, watching me." I tried again. "Car trouble? Or were you visiting someone out there?" "I don't want to talk," he said flatly. That shut me up quick. I focused on the road, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing at the mirror every few seconds. Each time he was staring right back at me, his expression growing more agitated. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed his breathing had changed. It was heavier, almost like he was working himself up to something. His right hand kept moving to his jacket pocket, then away again. My mouth went dry. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. No other cars, no houses, not even a gas station. Just me and him and whatever was in his pocket. "You're going too slow," he suddenly snapped, making me flinch. "Sorry, it's just, the weather is pretty bad and—" "Pull over," he interrupted. "What?" "Pull over, now." His voice had a dangerous edge that made the hair on my arms stand up. I slowed down, heart hammering in my chest. Was he going to rob me? Attack me? I had about $300 in my wallet from the day's fares. Would that be enough to satisfy him? I pulled onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching loudly despite the rain. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my head. "Turn off the engine," he ordered. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. The car went silent except for the sound of rain hammering the roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. Then something unexpected happened. His gaze shifted from me to my phone, which was mounted on the dashboard. The GoCar app was still open, showing his name, profile picture, which was just a default silhouette, and our route. He went very still. I could almost see the wheels turning in his head as he realized something I'd taken for granted. The app knew exactly who he was, where I'd picked him up, and where I was taking him. If anything happened to me, there would be a digital trail leading straight to him. The tension in the car was suffocating. My finger hovered near the emergency button in the app, but I was afraid to move. Would pressing it make things worse? Would help even arrive in time out here? After what felt like an eternity, he spoke again, his voice different now, controlled, calculating. I changed my mind. This is close enough. Before I could respond, he opened the door and stepped out into the downpour. I twisted in my seat to watch him, expecting him to try something, to reach back in to reveal whatever was in his pocket. But he just stood there for a moment, rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead, his eyes locked with mine. Then he slammed the door and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond my headlights. I sat there, frozen, for a good 5 minutes, expecting him to emerge from the shadows. Finally, I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove away as fast as I dared on the slick roads. I kept checking my mirrors, certain I'd see him somehow following me. I cancelled all my rides for the rest of the night and drove straight home, double-checking that no one had followed me. I couldn't sleep at all, replaying every moment of that encounter in my head. 3 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a detective from the Lakeside County Sheriff's Department. My stomach dropped before she even explained why she was calling. "We're investigating a missing person case," she said. "Your information came up in our system as having picked up a passenger near the area where the person was last seen." I told her everything: the weird pickup location, how he appeared out of nowhere, his behavior during the ride, how he made me pull over and then left. I described him as best I could, though I hadn't gotten a great look at his face. The detective asked if I could come to the station to give a formal statement, which I did the next day. They showed me a photo of the missing person, a guy named Marcus Elliott, mid-30s, who'd gone camping in the forest near where I'd made the pickup. He'd been reported missing when he didn't return home and didn't show up for work. But here's the thing: the man in the photo wasn't my passenger, not even close. My passenger was older, with different features entirely. The police checked the go-car records. The account that had requested my ride belonged to someone named Thomas Werner, but when they tried to contact him, they discovered the account was created using stolen credit card information. The phone number was a burner that was no longer in service. They searched the area where I'd picked him up and where I'd dropped him off, but the storm had washed away any potential evidence. No sign of Marcus Elliott or my mysterious passenger. It's been 3 weeks now, and I haven't heard anything new from the police. Marcus Elliott is still missing. I've started driving for go-car again, but only during daylight hours, and I've started carrying pepper spray. I can't stop thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't had the app open where he could see it, or what might have happened to Marcus Elliott out in those woods. Sometimes I wonder if my passenger found what he was looking for when he made me pull over, if he spotted something in the darkness that I couldn't see. The detective told me I probably wasn't in any danger, that the guy probably just needed a ride and used a stolen account, but she couldn't explain why he'd want to be picked up from the middle of nowhere during a storm, or why he'd want to be dropped off in an equally remote location. I keep replaying that moment when he noticed my phone, when his whole demeanor changed, the look in his eyes when he realized he was traceable. What was he planning to do before he saw that? And what did he do after he disappeared into that rainy darkness? I don't know if I'll ever get answers, but I know one thing for certain. I was alone in my car with someone dangerous that night. Someone who might have had very different plans for how our ride would end. Story 16. I still check the windows every night, 3 times. I never used to be this paranoid, but after what happened last year, I think I have a right to be. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel safe in my own home again. I'm sorry if this post is a bit all over the place, but I need to get this out there. Maybe someone has experienced something similar, though honestly, I hope to God no one has. It was spring 2003, late March, and I was getting ready for our annual Easter celebration at our home in Deerfield, Illinois. I'd spent the morning cleaning the house and preparing food while my husband Jim took our kids, Emma, 10, and Tyler, 7, to pick up some last-minute things from the store. My mum was coming over, along with Jim's parents and his sister's family. Nothing unusual, just a normal holiday gathering. The day before, Emma had been playing hide-and-seek with Tyler up in our attic. We don't go up there much. It's mostly Christmas decorations and boxes of old stuff we never unpacked from our last move. Emma came running downstairs holding this old camera she'd found in a box labeled Dad's Things. My father had passed away 5 years earlier, and Mom had given me some of his belongings that she thought I might want to keep. The camera was a vintage Polaroid SX70, one of those old ones that folds flat and pops up when you want to use it. I remembered him having it when I was young, but I hadn't seen it in years. Emma was fascinated by it, having grown up in the digital age. She kept asking if it still worked, and honestly, I had no idea. There was even an unopened pack of film with it, but it had to be ancient. "Can we try it, Mom? Please?" Emma had begged. I figured the film was probably ruined after all these years, but I told her we could try it during our Easter gathering. What harm could it do? If anything, it would be a nice way to remember my dad during the holiday. Easter Sunday came, and everyone arrived around 1 in the afternoon. The weather was perfect, sunny, not too warm, with a light breeze. We set up tables in the backyard, which backs up to a small wooded area. It's one of the reasons we bought the house, the privacy and the view. After dinner, Emma remembered the camera and ran to get it. Everyone gathered for a group photo on the back patio. My brother-in-law Jack offered to take it, but Emma insisted on setting the timer so everyone could be in the picture. We lined up, all 11 of us, with the woods in the background. The camera made that distinctive whirring sound as it spit out the photo. We all crowded around, watching the image slowly develop. That's when the mood changed. "Who's that?" Tyler pointed at the edge of the photo. At first I couldn't see what he was talking about. Then I noticed it. At the edge of the woods behind us, partially hidden by a tree, was the figure of a man. He was wearing dark clothing, maybe a jacket. His face wasn't clear, but he was definitely there, watching us. I felt a chill run down my spine. "Was someone else out there?" I asked, looking around the yard as if the person might still be there. Everyone denied seeing anyone during our gathering. Jim immediately walked to the edge of the property to check, but found nothing. When he came back, he suggested it might be a smudge on the film or a trick of the light. The film was decades old, after all. But my mother's reaction told me it wasn't a smudge. Her face had gone completely white. She took the photo from my hands with trembling fingers and stared at it, then excused herself and went inside without another word. I followed her to the kitchen, where I found her sitting at the table, still holding the photo. "Mom, what's wrong?" She looked up at me, and I swear she looked 20 years older in that moment. "Sarah, do you remember when we lived in Northbrook, when you were about 6? I nodded. We'd moved from Northbrook when I was 8, but I had vague memories of our old house. "There was a reason we moved," she said quietly. "In '76, there were a series of break-ins in our neighborhood. Someone was getting into homes, mainly during holidays when families were gathered together." I sat down across from her, my stomach tightening. "Your father, he was always protective. He bought that camera to document family moments, but also because he was worried about the break-ins. On Easter Sunday that year, he thought he saw someone watching our house from the street. He grabbed the camera and managed to take a picture of the man running away." She tapped the Polaroid on the table. "This man, in this picture you just took, he looks just like the man in your father's photo. The same build, the same stance. It's impossible, but it's him." I felt ice in my veins. "Mom, that was almost 30 years ago. It can't be the same person." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. The figure in our photo was too distinct to be a smudge or a shadow. When I told Jim what my mother had said, he immediately called the police. They came and took our statement and the photo, but I could tell they weren't taking it very seriously. Just to be safe, they said they'd increase patrols in our area and suggested we might want to consider a home security system. The next day, Jim had a company install motion sensors and cameras around our property. They also put in a silent alarm that would alert the police if triggered. I felt a little better having these measures in place, but I still couldn't shake the uneasiness that had settled over me. 3 days after Easter, Jim took the kids to soccer practice while I went grocery shopping. When I pulled into our driveway, there were 3 police cars parked outside our house. My heart nearly stopped. An officer approached my car as I got out. "Mrs. Harmon, we responded to your silent alarm about 20 minutes ago." "We have an alarm?" I was still getting used to the new security system. "Yes, ma'am. When we arrived, we found a basement window broken on the east side of your house. No one was inside, but..." He hesitated, which scared me more than anything else. "But what?" I demanded. "We found something. A Polaroid photo on your kitchen counter. It wasn't there when you left, according to your husband." They showed me the photo and my legs nearly gave out. It was a picture of our bedroom taken from the doorway. Jim and I were in bed, sleeping. The timestamp at the bottom of the frame showed it had been taken at 2:15 in the morning, the night after Easter. Someone had been in our house while we slept. Someone had stood in our bedroom doorway and photographed us, and our children's rooms were just down the hall. The police took the photo as evidence and did a thorough investigation of our home. They found partial fingerprints on the broken basement window that matched unsolved home invasions from the 1970s. The same person had been active all these years, and somehow he'd found us. Over the next few weeks, more details emerged that made the situation even more terrifying. The police discovered a pattern spanning decades. The intruder targeted families during holidays, particularly those who had moved from our original Northbrook neighborhood. It seemed he had followed specific families as they relocated over the years. But it was what they found in early May that broke the case wide open. Acting on a tip, police searched a house in rural Wisconsin and discovered thousands, literally thousands, of Polaroid photos of families taken without their knowledge. And among them were dozens of photos of my family spanning decades. Me as a teenager, my college graduation, my wedding day, the births of my children. The man they arrested was in his 70s, Walter Greaves. He had been a janitor at my elementary school in Northbrook. He claimed he wasn't stalking families, but protecting them by keeping watch during vulnerable times. In his twisted mind, he was some kind of guardian angel. The police found photos taken through windows, from the edges of woods, and during our most intimate family moments. He had been watching us for over 30 years, following us from home to home, watching me grow up, get married, have children of my own. The revelation that we had been watched for decades left psychological scars that I'm still dealing with. I can't look at family photos without scanning the backgrounds for faces that shouldn't be there. I've taken down most of the pictures in our house. I can't bear to look at them anymore. We moved again to a different state this time. We have the best security system money can buy, but I still check the windows every night, 3 times. The truly frightening thing isn't just that he was watching us all those years. It's that if Emma hadn't found that camera, if that ancient film hadn't somehow still worked, we would never have known he was there at all. And he would still be watching us today. I still don't understand why my father kept that camera or why the film still worked after all those years. Sometimes I think maybe he was still trying to protect us even after he was gone. The case became known locally as the Easter picture. The media covered it for a while but eventually moved on to other stories. But I can't move on. Every time I see someone taking pictures at a public event, I wonder, are they documenting a memory or are they documenting me? And every time I look at a family photo, I can't help but ask myself, who else might be in this picture that I don't see? Who's standing just outside the frame, watching? Story 17. I've been a police officer in Dryden for 11 years now. It's a small coastal town in Maine where nothing much happens. Mostly petty theft, drunk tourists in summer, and the occasional domestic dispute. The kind of place where we joke that our biggest nemesis is Mrs. Henderson's escaped chickens. At least that's what I thought until 3 months ago. It started with a call from Eleanor Walsh. I remember because it was just after 3 in the morning, and I was the only one at the station besides Rick, who was asleep in the break room. Eleanor was 78, a retired school teacher who taught half the town, including me in 3rd grade. She lived alone in that blue Victorian on Maple Street, the one with all the bird feeders. "Officer Kinney? Sarah? I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said, her voice trembling in a way that immediately set me on edge. Eleanor wasn't the type to scare easily. She'd once chased off a bear from her garden with nothing but a broom and harsh language. "Someone's outside my house," she whispered. "I heard noises on the porch, and then they started calling my name." I told her I'd be right over, but she stopped me. The strangest thing is, I think I recognize the voice, but I can't place from where. I drove over with lights off, standard procedure for potential prowlers. Her house was dark except for a single lamp in what I knew was her living room. I checked around the property first. Nothing obvious, no footprints in the soft ground by her windows, though there were some scuff marks on the porch that could have been anything. Eleanor answered the door in her robe, hair in curlers, looking smaller than I remembered. She made us tea while I took her statement, hands shaking as she described waking to the sound of someone on her porch, followed by a man's voice calling, "Eleanor, Eleanor Walsh," softly, almost intimately. It was like he knew me, she said, clutching her mug, like he was disappointed I wasn't answering. I filed it as a suspicious incident, told her to keep her doors locked, and promised to have patrols go by her house regularly. Looking back, I wish I'd done more. 3 days later, I got a similar call from Harold Buckley, 82, who lived about 2 miles from Eleanor. Same thing. Woke up to someone calling his name from outside. Then Margaret Simmons 2 days after that. By the 5th call in 2 weeks, all from elderly residents living alone, I knew we had a pattern. The chief assigned me to lead the investigation since I'd taken the initial reports. I started connecting dots. All the victims were over 75, all lived alone, all reported the same experience. Someone outside their home in the middle of the night, calling their name in a voice they felt they should recognize. None of them had been robbed or physically harmed, which made it hard to allocate resources to the case. Probable teenagers, the chief said, though I could tell he didn't believe it either. What? Teenager knows the full names of elderly residents and targets them specifically? I decided to interview all the victims again, looking for any connection. It took Eleanor mentioning her recent gallbladder surgery for me to see it. Every single person targeted had been hospitalized within the last 3 months. I spent a whole day at Dryden Regional reviewing their records with the hospital administrator's reluctant permission. All of them had stayed overnight. All had been on the same floor, though not all at the same time. And all had been treated at least once by the same night nurse, Gabriel Watts. Watts had been at Dryden Regional for about 7 months, transferred from a hospital in New Hampshire with glowing recommendations, quiet, efficient, kept to himself. The kind of employee nobody notices much. I ran a background check expecting nothing. What I got was a request to call Detective Marcus Johnson in Lakeville, NH. My stomach dropped before I even picked up the phone. "Officer Kinney," Johnson said when I called. "Interesting you should ask about Gabriel Watts. We had a series of unexplained deaths among elderly patients after he left. Nothing we could prove, but enough to make me uncomfortable. 3 people, all found dead in their homes weeks after discharge. Natural causes, supposedly. I felt sick. Was there any evidence of foul play? Nothing concrete, just a pattern. All lived alone. All had been treated by Watts. One neighbor reported hearing someone calling the victim's name the night before he was found dead. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. I pulled Watts's employment history. He'd worked at 5 hospitals in 3 states over the last 6 years. I started making calls. By the end of the day, I had similar stories from 3 other towns. Elderly patients dying at home after discharge. No evidence of foul play. In one case, a victim's son had installed a security camera after his mother complained about someone calling her name. The footage showed a man on her porch at 2 in the morning, mouth moving, though there was no audio. The son didn't recognize him, and the quality was too poor for a positive ID. I took everything to the chief, who agreed we needed to act. We put Watts under surveillance, but he did nothing suspicious. Went to work, went home to his apartment, occasionally shopped or went to the gym. No visits to elderly residents' homes. Then Mrs. Peterson called. 81, lived alone, had been in for pneumonia last month. "There's someone outside calling my name," she whispered. "I'm scared, Sarah." I raced over with 2 other officers. We set up a perimeter and waited. At exactly 1:15 in the morning, a dark figure approached her house from the back. He wore dark clothes and moved carefully, with purpose. He went to her bedroom window and stood there, not doing anything at first. Then we heard it. Helen Peterson, soft but clear in the night air. We moved in. The figure bolted, but Michaels caught him coming over a fence. It was Watts. The search of his apartment made me physically ill. He had a notebook with names, addresses, medical details, and schedules of elderly patients. When they woke up, when they took medication, whether they had family nearby. He had hospital IDs from 6 different facilities, and he had a medical bag containing syringes and vials of various medications that could cause heart failure or stroke. When I interrogated him, I expected denial. Instead, he was eerily calm. They were suffering, he said, or they would suffer soon. I was being merciful. By terrifying them first? I asked. Calling their names in the night? He looked at me like I was stupid. I needed to know if they were alone, if they recognized my voice from the hospital and felt safe enough to open their door. That's what keeps me up at night still. The calculation of it. The way he used people's trust against them. I asked him how many he'd killed before we caught him. 7, he said without emotion. Would have been 8 if you hadn't interfered. We confirmed 5 of them. The other 2 we'll probably never know for sure. Their bodies were cremated, and no autopsy was done because their deaths appeared natural. Elderly people living alone die all the time. Who questions it? Watts is serving multiple life sentences without parole. The hospital has implemented new security measures for patient information. We held town meetings about safety, but the damage is done. Eleanor Walsh still calls the station sometimes, convinced she hears someone calling her name. Mrs. Peterson moved in with her daughter in Portland, and every time my phone rings after midnight, my heart races. The worst part is how he selected them. He'd review their charts while caring for them, looking for those who lived alone, who had few visitors, who mentioned they'd been feeling isolated. He'd make small talk, gain their trust, learn their habits. Then weeks later, he'd visit their homes in the middle of the night, armed with medications that would mimic natural death. Last week, I visited Eleanor. She's installed 3 new locks on her door and keeps a baseball bat by her bed. I can't stop hearing it, she told me, that voice saying my name like he knew me. I understand. Sometimes when I'm alone in my house, I swear I hear someone whisper Sarah from just outside my window. I know it's just the wind or my mind playing tricks, but I check my locks twice every night now. The thing that haunts me most is what Watts said during his final interview. I asked why he called their names instead of just breaking in silently. Because fear thins the blood, he said, makes the medications work faster, and there's something satisfying about them knowing someone is coming for them but not being able to stop it. I've been a cop for 11 years, but I'd never truly understood evil until that moment. I still don't know what makes someone decide that vulnerable, lonely people deserve to die. I don't know how many others like Watts are out there, wearing scrubs and smiles, holding the lives of people in their hands. All I know is that in Dryden, people still check their locks twice before bed. And when the phone rings late at night, nobody wants to answer it, afraid of whose voice might be on the other end, calling their name. Story 18. I've never been much of a writer, so bear with me here. I just need to get this off my chest because even after 2 years, I still can't sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat. I still flinch when customers approach the counter too quickly. I still touch the scar on my neck when I get nervous. I used to work nights at a Shell station just outside of Pinewood. It's one of those places where you can drive for 20 minutes without seeing another building, just trees and the occasional deer crossing sign. The pay was decent, especially for the graveyard shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and my boss let me park my trailer on the empty lot behind the station. Saved me rent money, and the commute was just a 2-minute walk. Perfect setup for a guy like me who was trying to save up for community college. That night started like any other. It was a Tuesday in March. Cold enough that I kept the heater running, but not so bad that I needed my heavy jacket. Business was slow as usual, a couple truckers stopping for coffee around 11, a group of teenagers buying energy drinks and chips around midnight. By 1 in the morning, I was alone, scrolling through my phone and occasionally glancing at the security monitor. The bell above the door chimed, and I looked up to see a sedan parked directly in front of the entrance. Weird parking spot, but whatever. The guy who walked in was maybe in his 40s, average height, wearing jeans and a dark gray hoodie. Nothing remarkable about him except that he parked like an asshole. He nodded at me, not a friendly nod, just an acknowledgement, and then started walking through the aisles. I didn't think much of it at first. People come in at all hours, and night customers are often a bit off. But then I noticed he was whistling, just softly whistling some tune I couldn't place while he picked up items, examined them, and put them back. After about 5 minutes of this, I started feeling uneasy. He hadn't actually put anything in his hands to buy, just wandering, whistling, looking. The cameras in the store were old and only covered the register area and front door. The rest of the aisles were blind spots. "Finding everything okay?" I called out. Standard customer service question, but also my way of letting him know I was watching. "Just browsing," he replied without looking at me. His voice was deeper than I expected, with an accent I couldn't place. Suddenly, he put down the candy bar he was looking at and walked out, just like that. The bell chimed again, and I watched through the window as he went to his car, but he didn't get in. Instead, he opened the back door and seemed to be searching for something. My stomach tightened. I considered locking the door. We technically weren't supposed to lock up during business hours, but at 1 a.m. in the middle of nowhere, who would know? Before I could decide, the bell chimed again. He was back. This time, he walked straight to the counter. Up close, I noticed his eyes, pale blue, almost gray, and completely focused on me. Not in a normal way, but like he was studying me, memorizing me. "Quiet night, huh?" he said, placing his hands on the counter. His nails were dirty, and there was a small tattoo on his right wrist that looked like a snake or something. "Yeah, usually is around this time," I replied, trying to sound casual while keeping my distance. The counter between us felt way too narrow. "You work here alone?" he asked, glancing around the store. Red flag. Major red flag. We're specifically trained not to answer that question. "My manager's in the back," I lied. "He's doing inventory." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That right? Well, I could use some help. Got a flat tire, and I'm wondering if you have an air pump I could use." I hesitated. We did have an air pump outside, but it had been broken for months. I also had my own portable compressor in my trailer that I used for my bike. "The one outside is broken," I said. "Sorry about that." He leaned forward slightly. "That's a shame. Any chance you have one I could borrow? I'd really appreciate it. I'm trying to get to Phoenix by morning for my daughter's birthday." He was laying it on thick with the daughter story, but part of me thought, what if he's telling the truth? What if he really does have a flat and needs to get to his kid? Plus, I figured helping him might make him leave faster. "I've got a portable one in my trailer," I said. "Let me grab it real quick. I'll have to lock up for a minute." "I appreciate that, man, really do." I locked the register, grabbed my keys, and headed out to my trailer. The whole time I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to follow me. But he stayed by his car, checking his phone. When I returned with the compressor, he was leaning against his sedan, a dark blue Toyota with out-of-state plates. "Which tire is it?" I asked, keeping a few feet between us. "This one," he said, pointing to the rear passenger side tire. I crouched down, plugged the compressor into the car's cigarette lighter through the open window, and attached it to the valve stem. The pressure gauge read 35 psi, perfectly normal, not flat at all. That's when I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. I looked up just in time to see his fist coming straight at my face. The impact knocked me backward onto the pavement. Before I could react, his boot connected with my ribs, forcing the air from my lungs. Shouldn't work alone at night, he said, casually, as if we were still having our conversation from earlier. Then he kicked me again, harder this time. I tried to crawl away, to scream, to do anything, but each kick left me gasping. I tasted blood in my mouth, my vision blurred. The pain was everywhere at once. When the kicking finally stopped, I thought maybe he was done. Maybe he'd just rob the store now and leave. I was lying on my side, facing the gas pumps, when I heard him kneel down behind me. "Nothing personal," he whispered in my ear. Then I felt it, cold metal pressing against my throat. In that moment, time slowed down. I remember thinking about my mom, how she'd warned me about taking this job, how she'd hate having to identify my body. The pressure increased, and then came the pain, a burning, tearing sensation as he dragged the blade across my neck. It didn't feel deep enough to kill me immediately, but I knew I was dead anyway. The warm wetness spreading down my collar told me everything I needed to know. He stood up, wiped the knife on his jeans, and walked toward the store entrance. I lay there, one hand pressed to my throat, feeling my blood pumping between my fingers. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're dying, but that's not true. All I could think about was how I didn't want to die in a gas station parking lot, how nobody would find me until the morning shift arrived, how my mom would cry. Then I remembered my phone in my back pocket. With every movement sending waves of agony through my body, I managed to pull it out. My fingers were slippery with blood, but I somehow unlocked it and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice sounded a million miles away. Help, was all I could manage at first. Then, Shell Station, Highway 22, Pinewood. He cut my throat. I don't remember much after that. Snippets of lying on the cold pavement, the sound of the store bell chiming as the man left with bags full of cash and cigarettes, the distant wail of sirens, a paramedic's face hovering over mine, saying words I couldn't understand. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. The doctor told me the knife had missed my jugular by millimeters, that I was lucky to be alive, that my weight and the awkward angle of the attack had saved my life. The police came and showed me photos, asked me questions I could barely answer through the tube in my throat. They never caught him. The cameras were too grainy, the car plates were stolen, and there were no fingerprints or DNA. Just another drifter passing through, looking for an easy target. It's been 2 years now. I moved back in with my mom while recovering, then got a day job at a hardware store in the city. I'm in therapy, but I still can't talk about that night without my hands shaking. I still touch the scar on my neck when I get nervous, a habit my therapist says is my way of reminding myself that I survived. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe because I saw a man who looked like him at the mall yesterday, and even though I know it wasn't him, I had a panic attack in the food court. Maybe because the nightmares are getting worse again, or maybe because I need you all to understand something. That guy didn't just randomly decide to attack me. He studied me. He checked out the store, saw I was alone, planned his approach. He used a story designed to appeal to my better nature, and I fell for it. I'll never work nights again. I'll never work alone again. And I'll never, ever try to help a stranger with a flat tire. Because sometimes the monsters don't hide in the dark. Sometimes they walk right up to the counter, make small talk, and wait for you to let your guard down.